Hello, 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 hello. Probando, uno, dos, tres. We're just getting started. Happy Monday, guys. How are you? How are you? Let me see. Started. Happy Monday, guys. How are you? How are you? Let me see. Started. It's good. It's good. Okay. Uh, we are going to get started with chapter 7, 8, and 9 of the ISSA 35 personal trainer chapters. This is going to be chapter 7 is client assessments, chapter 8 is going to be elements of fitness, and chapter 9 is going to be principles of program design. And all of these principles are going to be part of the intake and ongoing evaluation portion. For the client assessment part, it's going to be 15%. You have to collect and review all necessary documentation like medical release, medical history, liability waiver, conduct basic fitness assessment like postural performance, movement strength, cardiovascular flexibility, and body composition, and the pro results of all assessments in relation to client goals, like comparison to the general population, initial assessment versus ongoing assessment. And then program design and implementation is 25%. Here is the chapter 9 principles of program design, where you have to apply principles of specificity for clients to achieve goals like uh, hypertrophy, cardiovascular endurance, lean body mass changes, evaluate and integrate applications of general adaptation syndromes, and identify when to apply under undulating versus linear periodization. All of these is going to be about 40% of the exam. You also have elements of fitness in the exercise selection and technique portion. So like the kinetic chain checkpoints, which is also on the applied science portion, the kinetic chain checkpoints, like remember the myokinetic chains in the functional anatomy. Uh, so all of this, all of the portions in applied science we already saw in the first 5 chapters. Uh, Guys, I'm sorry, I was kind of sick starting yesterday, so yeah, this is gonna be kind of hard. But anyways, I have the allergies for some like it's kind of annoying. So yeah, we're gonna get started with client assessments. That's going to be chapter 7. These 3 chapters are together, so what we're going to do, so it's part of the model 5, the client assessment, elements of fitness, and predictable program design. Those three chapters are part of the same model 5. So we are going to first get with the terms for each of them, and after we finish this, like each chapter, we're gonna go over the workbook part in it for each chapter, and after that, after all of that, we're gonna go over the quiz. So that's what we're gonna do today. Give me 1 second. I have to. I'm gonna get some paper. That's what happens when you have the allergies. It sucks. Anyways, let's get started. So client assessments is going to be chapter 7, client assessments. And that's what are we actually doing with our clients? That's part of client assessment. What are we actually doing with our clients? So the learning objectives is going to be explain the purpose and importance of fitness assessments. Describe the most common assessments a personal trainer uses, and name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and elements of each. Name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and elements of each. Those are going to be the 3 learning objectives for this chapter. Which we have the health and exercise history. You have 2 types of assessments. You have subjective and objective assessments for the health and exercise history. So the terms for client assessments are going to be subjective versus objective assessments. You have the body composition assessments, then you have the circumference or girth measurements. You have circumference or girth measurements. Then you have VO2 max. You have cardiorespiratory fitness assessments, which you are going to be using resting heart rate and blood pressure. Then for the cardiorespiratory fitness assessments, resting heart rate and blood pressure. Then you have the kinetic chain checkpoints. You have about 6 or 7, if I'm not mistaken. Is right here. You have 7 circumference or girth measurements, anyways. And you have for kinetic chain checkpoints, you have 6 kinetic chain checkpoints. Then you have postural deviations uh, for the ideal posterior lordosis, kyphosis, and scoliosis. For the postural deviation for the lumbar spine, thoracic spine, and cervical spine. Then you are going to have a after that you have the strength assessments like the leg press or squat for lower body and bench press for upper body. You have 1 repetition max calculation. You have muscular endurance like the push-up test. And you have 3 main sections of the spine, the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar spine, which we already saw over here. Then you have the spinal deviations. We already went over them. Uh, Lordosis, kyphosis, and scoliosis. Then you're going to have the movement and posture assessments and the squat and overhead squat assessments. Movement and posture assessments and squat and overhead squat assessments. So we're going to go over each of them today, uh, along with the workbook. So let's get started. So what are we actually doing with our clients? That's client assessments. And remember, that's part of the intake and ongoing evaluation portion of the exam. Collect and review all necessary documentation like medical release, medical history, liability waiver. Conduct a basic fitness assessment, posture, performance, movement, strength, cardiovascular flexibility, body composition, and interpret results of all assessments in relation to client goals, comparison to the general population, initial assessment versus ongoing assessments. Let's get started with this. Is going to be Chapter 7 Client Assessment. So what are we actually doing with our clients? Learning objectives. Explain the purpose of and importance of fitness assessments. Describe the most common assessments a personal trainer uses. And name and describe the common goals of a fitness professional and elements of FISH. So health and exercise history. You have types of assessment, which are going to be subjective and objective assessment. For health and exercise history, you're going to have the PAR-Q, the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. For the health and history assessment, you have the PAR-Q, the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire, for the subjective assessment forms for health and exercise history. And you have 2 types of assessments, which are going to be subjective and objective. So the suggested assessment forms you're going to have client intake form, you're going to have PAR-Q, which is the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. You have Health History Questionnaire. You have a liability waiver, physician's letter of clearance in case you have an injury, and then you have a 3-day dietary record, and finally a 3-day dietary record to track your diet. A lot of clients are not going to want to do that because of lack of time, but you need to use like MyFitnessPal app, for example, as a 3-day dietary record. Uh, you have SMART goals, which are going to be, and that's important if you have SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals for our clients. The SMART goals. So the body composition assessments are based on sex, on the low essentials. So the body composition assessments are based on sex, and they are according to how they look. So low essentials, athletic, fit, average, or height or overweight. So for males, you have low essentials going to be from 4 to 6%. Athletic, you have 7 to 10%. Fit, you have 11 to 16%. Average, you have 17 to 25%, and high overweight, you have 26% or higher for the body composition assessments. For females, it's based on sex. So low essentials, you have 10 to 12%. Athletic, you have 13 to 20%. Fit, you have 21 to 24%. Average, you have 25 to 31%. And high overweight, you have 32%. That's for the body composition assessments. You have for males, again, let's do this again. For males, you have 4 to 6% of low essentials. Athletic, you have 7 to 10%. Fit, you have 11 to 16%. For average, you have 17 to 25%. And finally, high overweight, you have 26% or higher. For females, low essential is going to be 10 to 12%. Athletic is going to be 13 to 20%. Fit is going to be 21 to 24%. Average is 25 to 31%. And high or overweight, you have 32% or higher. Now, the body mass index, that's going to be part of the body composition assessment. You have the body mass index. You have the bioelectrical impedance. You have the body, for the body composition assessment, you have the body mass index. You have the bioelectrical impedance. The bioelectrical impedance, you have the waist to height ratio. You have the air displacement. It's part of the body composition assessments. The body mass index, BMI, which is just going to be your height times your weight, I believe, your BMI. Then your bioelectrical impedance, you have a waist to height ratio. You have air displacement, petismography, ADP. You have the circumference measurements. You have hydrostatic weighting. You have the waist to hip ratio. You have the dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, which is about $300. The dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, the DEXA, and finally you have the skin fold measurements. Now you have different and the skin fold measurements. Now you have you have different cardiorespiratory fitness assessments. You have different cardiorespiratory fitness assessments. A personal trainer should know the following before engaging in cardiorespiratory assessments. So you have different cardiorespiratory fitness assessments, and the personal trainer should know the following before engaging in cardiorespiratory assessments. You should know that resting heart rate and the blood pressure. For a cardiorespiratory fitness assessment, you should know about the resting heart rate and the blood pressure. So a professional trainer should know the following before engaging in cardiorespiratory assessments. They should know about the resting heart rate, the RHR, and the blood pressure, which we're going to go over in the cardiorespiratory chapter 11. Now, assessing cardiovascular fitness. To assess cardiovascular fitness, you need tests. To assess cardiovascular fitness, you need tests like the Cooper 12-minute run, the 1.5-mile run, the Rockport 1-mile walk, and finally the step test. Now, assessing strength. To assess strength, you need the leg press or squat and the bench press. Assessing strength. You need leg press or squat and the bench press. So to assess strength, you need the leg press or squat and the bench press. It's a result of 5 or 10 repetition max testing. It's a result of 5 or 10 repetition max testing to estimate your one repetition max. Because most people cannot do a one repetition max test because it will be too much, and you need to be able to fortify those sarcomeres. Then that's why you need to do a 5 or 10 repetition max testing to estimate your one repetition max test. And max weight in one repetition you can lift. One repetition max test, which is going to be the maximum weight in one repetition that you can lift, your maximum weight. So one repetition max example, you have step 1, you have 100 minus the number of reps times 2.5 divided by 100 to estimate your one repetition max. Step 2, you have the weight lifted divided by the estimated percentage of one repetition max. And the step 3, you have the estimated one repetition max divided by the body weight, comparable assessment value. So the lower body strength assessment chart. So the lower body strength assessment chart is divided in rating and age for men and women, the leg press or squat. So the lower body strength assessment chart is divided in rating and age for men and women, like leg press or squat. So for example, to assess muscular endurance, you need to do the push-up test, and client uses proper form in all repetitions. To assess muscular endurance, you need the push-up test, for example. To assessing muscular endurance, you need the push-up test, where client uses proper form in all repetitions. The client has to use proper form in all repetitions to assess muscular endurance. You need the push-up test where the client uses proper form in all repetitions. Now, the movement and posture test. But before starting that, then we're going to do an example of this assessing strength. You have a 34-year-old female weighing 142 lbs, and she bench pressed 65 lbs 6 times. So the first step, you have to use the formula of 100 minus number of repetitions times 2.5. So you have 6 repetitions times 2.5 divided by 100 is going to be a 0.85%. It's going to be 0.85 or 85% of an estimated one repetition max. So you use 85% of one repetition max. So for step 2, you have to use the 0.85 to divide the weight of this female, which is going to be 65 pounds, divided by 0.85 is going to be 76.47 lbs. And that's going to be the weight, the estimated weight for the one repetition max for the bench press. So you weighted, so you bench press about 76.47 lbs. And finally, for the comparable assessment value, you need to divide that weight divided by the weight of the female, which is going to be 142 pounds. The 65 pounds was the weight that she bench pressed 6 times for an estimated one repetition max for bench press of 76.47 lbs. So that's 76.47 lbs divided by the weight of that female, which is 142, is going to be about 0.54, which is a comparable assessment value. And from the one repetition max table of a 30 to 39-year-old woman, the average range is between 0.53 to 0.61. So she is in that range. If she has 0.54 of a comparable assessment value, that means that she's in the average range of 0.53 to 0.61. So she's in the average range. If she's in a 0.54, so she's good for the comparable assessment value. You can always improve that number with work, but she's good for now, the average range, 0.53 to 0.61. Now, you have in here a lower body, as you have in here a lower body, and these are the formulas that we use, by the way, for a comparable assessment value for the one repetition max. So you have a lower body strength assessment, for leg press or squat, lower body strength assessment chart divided in rating and age for men and women, like the leg press or the squat. Now, to assess muscular endurance, you have the push-up test for males and females. If to assess muscular endurance, you have the push-up test for males and females, which the client uses proper form in all repetitions for the push-up test for male and females. Now you have the movement and posture test. You have the movement and posture test uh, for the movement and posture assessments, which you have formal and posture test. You have movement and posture assessments or movement and posture test, which is going to be formal and posture test for the head and neck. Is the movement and posture assessment. You have the formal and posture test for the head and the neck, the shoulders, the spine, the hips, the knee, the foot, and the ankle. Formal and posture test for the head and the neck, the shoulders, the spine, the hips, the knee, the foot, and the ankle. The foot and the ankle. And the foot and the ankle. So the postures that we're going to have, so movement and posture assessments, you have foot and ankle, knee, hips, spine, shoulders, head and neck. For the formal and posture for the formal and posture test. Formal and posture test. So the posture you have ideal scoliosis, lordosis, and kyphosis. For the postural deviations, for the spinal deviations, you have ideal scoliosis, lordosis, and kyphosis. Frontal and lateral view. And finally, you have the squat and overhead squat assessments. You have the squat and overhead squat assessments. The squat and overhead squat assessments from page 244 to page 247 of the textbook, and you also have on the quiz notes, you have uh, one very detailed chapter where it pretty much goes over the squat and overhead squat assessments. So that's going to be from page 244 to 247 of the textbook. Squat and overhead squat assessments. And that was it for chapter 7. And now I'm going to go over in the workbook, like this is going to be client assessments, the chapter of client assessments. Client assessments, you have what information is collected on the following client forms. For the client intake form, you have foundational form that gathers demographic information such as the address, the phone number, and the email. For the client intake form, you have the the foundational form, which collects the demographic information like the client's address, phone number, and email. Part Q, physical activity readiness questionnaire. You have an intake form to assess client's readiness to begin a physical activity program and assesses injury potential. For the physical activity readiness questionnaire, you have an intake form to assess a client's readiness to begin a physical activity program and assess injury potential. And the health history questionnaire, you have a detailed client intake form that gathers information on the client's present and past health and medical history. The health history questionnaire, you have the detailed intake form that gathers information on the client's present and past health and medical history. And finally, the 3-day dietary record, a common fitness and nutrition intake form that allows clients to log their food consumption for 3 consecutive days to observe their food habits. And now here's how BMI is calculated. The body mass index is the body mass index, the BMI, it is a predictive health measure of weight divided by the height squared. It is a predictive health measure of weight divided by the height squared. So it's the weight of the individual divided by its height squared. So BMI is weight in kilometers. No, so height squared is weight in kilograms. The BMI is the weight of the individual in kilograms divided by the height of the individual in kilograms squared. So, and you also having here the BMI to kind of figure out where, in what range is the body mass index. So if it's less than 18.5, it's underweight. From 18.5 to about 24.9 is going to be normal. From 25 to 29.9 is overweight. From 30 to 34.9 is obese, and 35 and more is going to be extremely obese. It's going to be the body mass index in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website. So what information is collected in the following client forms? For the client intake form, you have the foundational form that gathers demographic information such as address, phone number, and email. For the part Q, you have physical activity readiness questionnaire. That's going to be the part Q. You have an intake form to assess a client's readiness to begin a physical activity program and assess injury potential. Health history questionnaire, you have a detailed client intake form that gathers information on a client's present and past health and medical history. And finally, 3-day dietary record is a common fitness and nutrition intake form that allows a client to log in their food consumption for 3 consecutive days to observe their food habits. A common fitness and nutrition intake form that allows the client to log in their food consumption for 3 consecutive days to observe their food habits. And BMI is the body mass index. It's calculated and is a predictive health measure of weight divided by the height square. So it's the weight divided by the height square, and it doesn't really tell too much because it doesn't consider the metabolism of the individual, the amount of time that he exercises, what he eats. It's not a good calculation, the BMI. It only considers the weight and the height, that's it. Weight divided by the height squared. Now, you have here the 7 sides for a circumference or girth measurements. So these are the 7 sides for a circumference or girth measure. You have here the 7 sides. You have 7 sides in total for a circumference or girth measurement. And that's going to be the neck, upper arm relaxed, the forearm when it's relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calf. You have the neck, the upper arm when it's relaxed, the forearm when it's relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calf. This is really important for the test. 7 sides for circumference or girth measurement. You have the 7 sides for the circumference or girth measurement. The 7 sides for the circumference or girth measurement. You have the neck, the upper arm when it's relaxed, the forearm when it's relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calf. That's going to be the 7 sides for the circumference or girth measurement. The neck, the upper arm relaxed, the forearm relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calf. The thigh and the calf. Yeah, it's gonna be the thigh right here. So 7 sides for circumference or girth measurement, the neck, the upper arm relaxed, the forearm relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calf. Now define VO2 max and explain how it is used in fitness. So VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen an individual can use during exercise, and it can be improved with training. An improvement in VO2 max. So VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen an individual can use during exercise. It's going to be VO2 max, and the maximum amount of oxygen an individual can use during exercise, and it can be improved with training. An improvement in VO2 max indicates higher cardiovascular fitness and performance, as well as reduced risk for also a reduced risk for heart disease and diabetes. A reduced risk for heart disease and diabetes. The general purpose of the cardiovascular assessments. The general purpose of the cardiovascular assessments is to determine a client's VO2 max measurement. It is used to track test objective assessments, formulas, estimated VO2 max, such as the Cooper. It is used to track test objective assessment formulas like the estimated VO2 max, such as the Cooper 12-minute run, the 1.5 mile, and the Rockport 1 mile walk, and the step test. The current physical condition and capability of the client can help in determining the correct test to use. The current physical condition and capability of the client can help in determining the correct test to use. Running may not be a safe or feasible option for some clients, so a walk test will be the best choice. So the current physical condition and capability of the client can help in determining the correct test to use. Running may not be a safe or feasible option for some clients, so a walk test will be the best choice. So the current physical condition and capability of the client can help in determining the correct test to use. Running may not be a safe or feasible option for some clients, so a walk test will be the best option. A walk test will be definitely the best option for those clients, the best choice for those clients. Uh, so the kinetic chain checkpoints right here, you have 6 kinetic chain checkpoints. It's going to be a system of links. List the 6 kinetic chain checkpoints. List the 6 kinetic chain checkpoints for the movement and posture assessments. The kinetic chain checkpoint is going to be a system of links or joints in the body that generate and transfer force from one to the other, using fitness to easily understand how the body moves. The kinetic chain checkpoint is a system of links or joints in the body that generate and transfer force from one to the other. It's using fitness to easily understand how the body moves. The checkpoints are points in the body where movement dysfunctions can be consistently and easily observed. As applied to gym exercises, these are points where the bracing techniques will usually occur. There are 6 critical checkpoints within the kinetic chain that are used to identify movement dysfunctions. They are typically reviewed from the floor up. Foot and ankle, the knee, the hips, the spine, the shoulders, and the head and the neck. So they're going to be the 6 kinetic chain checkpoints. It's going to be a system of links. The kinetic chain checkpoints is going to be a system of links or joints in the body that generate and transfer force from one to the other. It's used in fitness to easily understand how the body moves. A system of links or joints in the body that generate and transfer force from one to the other. It's used in fitness to easily understand how the body moves. The checkpoints are points in the body where the movement dysfunctions can be consistently and easily observed. As applied to gym exercises, these are the points where bracing technique will usually occur. Technique will usually occur. Will where bracing technique will usually occur. Uh, there are six critical kinetic chain checkpoints. There are 6 critical kinetic checkpoints. There are 6 critical checkpoints within the kinetic chain that are used to identify movement dysfunction. There are 6 critical checkpoints within the kinetic chain that are used to identify movement dysfunction. They are typically reviewed from the floor up. So it starts in the foot and the ankle. In the foot and the ankle is going to be the first critical checkpoint from the kinetic chain that are used to identify movement dysfunctions. They're typically reviewed from the floor up. So it starts with the foot and the ankle. It starts with the foot and the ankle, then it goes over the knee, then the hips, the spine, the shoulder, and the head and neck. Foot and ankle, the knee, the you have the foot and ankle, the knee, the hips, the spine, the shoulder, and the head and neck. Shoulders and head and neck. Now, the following postural deviations that happen in the spine, you have ideal posture, you have three postural deviations. You have 3 postural or spinal deviations. The following postural deviations. You have 3 postural or spinal deviations. You have the ideal posture right here. Lordosis is when the lumbar spine is uh, when the lumbar spine is deviated inside the body. Lordosis, then kyphosis is a deviation of the thoracic spine, and then scoliosis is when the thoracic spine is in one side or the other, is in either side of the sagittal plane. So ideal posture, the lordosis is a deviation of the lumbar spine, kyphosis a deviation of the thoracic spine, and scoliosis is going to be when the thoracic spine uh, is deviated but in the sagittal plane. The seven sides of the circumference gauge measure. Remember the neck, the upper arm relaxed, the forearm relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calves. The waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calves. The neck, the upper arm when it's relaxed, the forearm when it's relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calves. So ideal posture, lordosis, kyphosis, and scoliosis. Lordosis, kyphosis, and scoliosis. Yeah. Now, fill in the following table. You have lordosis. The possible tight muscles for lordosis is going to be the following type. Fill in the following table. The lordosis, the possible tight muscles for the lordosis is going to be the lower back, the erectors, and the hip flexors. The lower back erectors and hip flexors, and the possible weak muscles is going to be abdominals, it's going to be antagonists. The abdominals, especially the obliques, and the hip extensors. So for the lordosis, the possible tight muscles for lordosis is going to be the lower back, the erectors, and the hip flexors. And the possible weak muscles is going to be the abdominals, especially the obliques, and the hip extensors. For the flat back, you have the opposite for the tight muscles. You have the hip extensors and the upper abdominals of the possible tight muscles. Upper abdominals and the hip extensors for the flat back. And for the weak muscles, you have the lower back, the erectors, and the hip flexors. So the flat back is opposite to the lordosis. If the lordosis, you have the lower back, erectors, and hip flexors are the tight muscles, then those are going to be the weak muscles for the flat back. And if the abdominals, especially the obliques and the hip extensors, are the possible weak muscles for the lordosis, then you have the upper abdominals and the hip extensors as the possible tight muscles. Then for the sway backs, you have the sway back, you have the upper abdominals and the hip flexors as the tight muscles. And the possible weak muscles are going to be the oblique abdominals and the hip extensors for the sway back. For the sway back, the possible tight muscles are going to be the upper abdominals and the hip flexors, and the possible weak muscles are going to be the oblique abdominals and the hip extensors. Then for kyphosis, you have the internal oblique, the shoulder adductors, pectoralis and latissimus, and the intercostals for the kyphosis. For the kyphosis, which is going to be the deviation of the thoracic spine. Internal oblique, the shoulder adductors, which is going to be the pectorals and latissimus and intercostals are the possible tight muscles. And the possible weak muscles are going to be the erector spinae of the thoracic spine, and the scapular adductors, which are going to be the mid and lower trapezius. The scapular adductors, which are going to be the mid and lower trapezius. And the forehead, the possible tight muscles for the forehead is going to be the cervical extensors and the upper trapezius. Cervical extensors and the upper trapezius for the forehead. And the possible weak muscles are going to be the neck flexors. The possible weak muscles are going to be the neck flexors. Now, this is going to be the three main sections of the spine. The cervical spine at the top, the thoracic spine at the middle, and the lumbar spine at the bottom. You have the sacrum and the coccyx. The cervical spine at the top, the thoracic spine at the middle, and the lumbar spine at the bottom. And you have the sacrum and the coccyx for the spine. Cervical spine has 7 different short bones. Thoracic spine has 12, and lumbar spine has 5. Then you have the sacrum and the coccyx. So the possible tight muscles, you have the lordosis, lower back erectors and hip flexors. Possible weak muscles is going to be abdominals, especially obliques and hip extensors. For the flat back, you have possible tight muscles, which are the upper abdominals and the hip extensors, and the possible weak muscles are going to be the lower back erectors and the hip flexors. And the sway back, you have the possible tight muscles, the upper abdominals and the hip flexors. And then for the possible weak muscles, you have the oblique abdominals and the hip extensor. For the kyphosis, you have the internal oblique, the shoulder adductors, which are pectorals and latissimus and the intercostals. And the possible weak muscles are going to be the erector spinae of the thoracic spine, the scapular adductors, the mid and lower trapezius. And for the forward head, you have the possible tight muscles, which are the cervical extensors and upper trapezius. And for the weak muscles, you have the neck flexors. The cervical extensors and upper trapezius for the forward head, and the neck flexors for the possible weak muscles. Cervical extensors and upper trapezius for the forward head, and the neck flexor for the weak muscles is going to be the neck flexors. Neck flexors. I'm not sure if it's going to be in the test though. Lordosis, flat back, sway back, kyphosis, and forward head. The three main sections of the spine, the lumbar spine has 5, lumbar spine has 5, thoracic spine has 12, and cervical spine has 7. Then you have the sacrum and the coccyx. The sacrum and the coccyx. Sacrum and the coccyx. Now in here, you have knee valgus and knee varus. Now you have more malignant possible weak muscles for if in the table for the possible. Fill in the table for the below for the potential observations from a squat assessment. You also need to know knee valgus versus varus. Knee valgus is when the knees the valgus is when the knees are abducted. Varus is when they are adducted. Knee valgus is when the knees are abducted. Valgus is when the knees are abducted. Varus is when they are adducted. Valgus is valgus knees closer together. Valgus. Varus knees farther apart. Varus is knees farther apart. Not knees is valgus. Not knees is valgus. Not knees is valgus. Varus is farther apart. When the knees are closer together, is not knees is going to be valgus. Farther apart is going to be varus. Remember that. Fill in the table below for potential observations from a squat assessment. Fill in sacrum and coccyx. So fill in the following table. I'm going to go over this one more time, all right? Lordosis, lower back erectors, and hip flexors are going to be the possible tight muscles. And abdominals, especially obliques and hip extensors, is going to be possible weak muscles. Flat back, upper abdominals, and hip extensors is going to be the possible tight muscles. And the lower back erectors and the hip flexors is going to be the possible weak muscles. Sway back, the upper abdominals and the hip flexors is going to be the possible tight muscles, upper abdominals and the hip flexors. And then oblique abdominals and hip extensors is going to be the possible weak muscles. The kyphosis, you have the internal oblique, the shoulder adductors, pectoralis and latissimus, and the intercostalis. As the tight muscles and the weak muscles is going to be erector spinae of the thoracic spine, scapular adductors like the mid and lower trapezius. And finally, the mid and lower trapezius. And finally, the forward head. The forward head, you have the cervical extensors and upper trapezius. The forward head, you have the cervical extensors and upper trapezius of the possible tight muscles. The cervical extensors and the upper trapezius for the tight muscles, and the neck flexor for the weak muscles. Cervical for the forward head, you have the cervical extensors and the upper trapezius for the possible tight muscles. And you have the neck flexor for the weak muscles. Cervical extensors and upper trapezius for the tight muscles. Cervical extensors and upper trapezius. You have tight muscles, the cervical extensors and upper trapezius for the tight muscles for the forehead. Cervical extensors and upper trapezius for the tight muscles. And the neck flexors for the weak muscles. For the weak muscles. Now in here you have the three main sections of the three main sections of the thoracic spine is going to be the three main sections of the spine. You have the cervical spine, which has seven. Thoracic spine, you have 12 short bones, and the lumbar spine, you have 5. The sacrum and the coccyx for the spine. And then you have the filling the following table for the potential observation from a squat assessment. Remember that knee valgus is going to be when the knees are closer together, and varus is going to be further apart. Not nexus valgus, and valgus is further apart. Knee valgus, you have the gluteus maximus, medius, and vastus medialis, the possible weak muscles. Possible weak muscles for for the knee valgus, you have the gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, and the vastus medialis. Possible tight muscles, you have the adductors, the biceps femoris, the TFL, and the vastus lateralis. So that for the knee valgus, the possible weak muscles, you have the gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, and the vastus medialis. And the possible tight muscles are going to be adductors, the biceps femoris, the TFL, and the vastus lateralis. For the foot turnout, which is going to be eversion and external rotation, for the foot turnout, for eversion and external rotation, you have the gastrocnemius, the medial, the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, sartorius, and gracilis are the possible weak muscles. The gastrocnemius medial, semitendinosus, semimembranosus from the hamstrings, the sartorius, and the gracilis. And possible tight muscles, you have the soleus, the gastrocnemius, and the biceps femoris. I believe those muscles are in here. Look, the gracilis. You have in here the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, the gracilis, the sartorius, the adductor longus, the nucentia latae, the hip muscle right here, the psoas and iliacus, center facial latae, TFL, pectoralis minor, subclavius. Yeah. So knee valgus, the possible weak muscles are gluteus maximus, medius, and vastus medialis. Vastus medialis, vastus lateralis. Here it is rectus femoris, facilis. This femoris, yeah. So maximum gluteus medius and vastus medialis is going to be the possible weak muscles. Vastus lateralis is going to be the tight muscle for the knee valgus. The TFL, the biceps femoris, and the adductors. Now for the foot turnout, which is going to be eversion and external rotation, foot turnout, which is eversion and external rotation, you have the gastrocnemius, the medial gastrocnemius, the semitendinosus, the semimembranosus, the sartorius, and the gracilis as the possible weak muscles. You have the soleus, the gastrocnemius, lateral, and the biceps femoris as the possible tight muscles. I want to see what is the sartorius. Is it here? There it is, the sartorius. This is the sartorius right here in the anterior portion of of the quadriceps. The soleus, the gastrocnemius lateral, and the biceps femoris as the possible tight muscles. The forward lean. The forward lean, you have the gluteus maximus, erector spinae, and anterior tibialis. The possible weak muscles, you have the gluteus maximus, the erector spinae, and the anterior tibialis, which is going to be the possible weak muscles, the gluteus maximus, the erector spinae, and the anterior tibialis. And the possible tight muscles, you have the soleus, the gastrocnemius, the psoas, the rectus femoris, the rectus abdominals, and the external obliques. The tight muscles, the soleus, the gastrocnemius, the psoas, the rectus femoris, the rectus abdominis, and the external obliques. The forward lean. So possible weak muscles, the gluteus maximus, erector spinae, and anterior tibialis. And the possible tight muscles is going to be the soleus, the gastrocnemius, the psoas, the rectus femoris, the rectus abdominis, and the external obliques. Now the lumbar extension you have for the lumbar extension you have the gluteus maximus as the possible weak muscles, the gluteus maximus, You have the gluteus maximus, the transverse abdominis, the hamstring complex, and the multifidus. You have the gluteus maximus, the transverse abdominis, the hamstring complex, and the multifidus. The multifidus. For a lumbar extension, you have the multifidus muscle. The multifidus muscle right here. So you have the gluteus maximus, the transverse abdominis, the hamstring complex, and the multifidus as the possible weak muscles. Possible tight muscles, you have the psoas, the rectus femoris, the TFL, the erector spinae, and the latissimus dorsi for the lumbar extension. For heel elevation, you have the tibialis anterior as the possible weak muscle, and the soleus as the possible tight muscle. For the foot pronation, it's going to be the arch collapse for foot pronation, which is going to be like pronated, face up, leaning inward, supinated, leaning outward. For foot pronation, tibialis anterior and posterior as the possible tight muscles, the as the possible weak muscles. Sorry, it's switching here, bro, for some reason. Tibialis anterior and posterior, the gluteus medius and the gastrocnemius medial, and the gastrocnemius lateral, biceps femoris, and TFL as the possible tight muscles. The gastrocnemius lateral, the biceps femoris, and the TFL. And the lateral weight shift, for the lateral weight shift, you have gluteus medius in the same side of the shift. You have the tibialis anterior and the adductors opposite side of the shift. The gluteus medius in the same side of the shift for a lateral weight shift. When you are not in equilibrium at all, for a lateral weight shift, you have the gluteus medius on the same side of the shift, and the tibialis anterior and the adductors on the opposite side of the shift. And then you have for the possible tight muscles, you have the adductors, the TFL on the same side of the shift, the gastrocnemius, the soleus, the piriformis, the gluteus medius, and the biceps femoris. The piriformis. What the fuck is the piriformis? It's going to be right here on the hips. The piriformis. And biceps femoris. Opposite side of the shape is the biceps femoris. So they're going to be the table for a potential observation from a squat assessment. You have knee valgus, foot torn, diversion and external rotation, forward lean, lumbar extension, heel elevation, foot pronation, arch collapse, and the lateral weight shift. And the possible weak muscles and the possible tight muscles for each. Yeah. This is important information, but I don't believe it's going to be in the test. Like, if you read a squat assessment in here, integral knowledge collector revealed in the documentation. So that's integral and ongoing evaluation. It doesn't ask for a squat assessment. Like, I'm gonna search in here just in case. It doesn't talk about squat assessment, bro. It doesn't really talk about squat assessment. So for me to think that I have to learn that is really like a headache. You know what I mean? And the other one is gonna be like deviations. Spinal deviation is something that I believe I kind of have to learn. This is very basic, bro. Malignments. Let me see like a posture. Here is correcting technique. Educate client regarding exercise selection and technique and training instructions. So here you have after the program design and implementation, corrective technique. Educate client regarding technique and form. like coaching cues at chapter 14. Correct technique on kinetic change checkpoints or correct posture, use verbal and non-verbal cues. And correct muscular imbalance and incorrect posture and technique. Correct muscular imbalance and incorrect posture and technique. Let's see. Here. Correct muscular imbalance and incorrect posture and technique. Activities. Based on the client's physical abilities. So I don't really think this is going to be like really important to actually memorize. You need to know that an check with the foot and ankle, the knee, the hips, the spine, the shoulders, and head and neck, and the circumference. Good measurements in the neck, the upper arm relaxed, the forearm relaxed, the waist, the hips, the thigh, and the calves. In the waist, in the hips, in the thigh, and the calves. You need to know that, but the other ones you don't really need to know. You know what I mean? And then the ideal posture, lordosis, kyphosis, and scoliosis. You need to know what they mean. You need to know their definition, but you don't really need to know like the weak muscles and tight muscles for each. So, I mean, if you see this on the exam, if they ask you what is the possible weak muscles of the knee valgus, and you don't know it, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I tell you not to really worry about it, but if it is in the workbook, then this should be important. From like tibialis anterior is gonna be a possible weak muscle of the heel elevation, and then soleus is a possible tight muscle of heel elevation. So it's kind of like you need to kind of use your common sense. Like if you do heel elevation, what is the agonist and antagonist? You need to use common sense. And since you already know like the main muscles. But for example, multifidus. You really need to know multifidus. Like what is the multifidus? Uh, the multifidus muscle is gonna be around the spine, around the spine. And in here you see that in lumbar extension you have a multifidus weak muscle, and then you have a adductor spinae tight muscle. So you need to use common sense, your knowledge on the muscles and the neck flexors, hip extensors, and you'll get it. Cervical spine, thoracic spine, lumbar spine, sacrum and coccyx. All right, so now we're gonna go over chapter 8, elements of fitness. So elements of fitness is gonna be a chapter that is not really that long. So you have very few definitions. You have the components of fitness. We're going to be cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. You have five components of fitness. You have five components of fitness: cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. You have eight elements of fitness, which is going to be the warm up, flexibility training, core training, balance training, reactive training, resistance training, cardiorespiratory training, and the cool down. You have general versus specific warm up. Then you have the maximum heart rate formula. You have to know the maximum heart rate formula. Then you have then you have the free measurements used to determine intensity of cardiorespiratory training. You have the target heart rate, the rate of perceived exertion, and the heart rate zones. You have the metrics for to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory training. So you have three metrics used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory training. You have the target heart rate, the rate of perceived exertion, and the heart rate zones. The formula to estimate cardiac heart rate is going to be a person's age divided by 220. And then for chapter 9, the acute training variables on the principles of program design. And then you have all of that, all of those other definitions. So we're gonna go over chapters 8 and 9 after that. And the acute training variables, all of these numbers you need to know, the principle of specificity, all of the principles, the periodization of origin, and the elements of fitness training category. And then you go over classes of flexibility training. All right, so after this break, this is what I'm gonna do. Right now, this is the elements of fitness right here. So now we are going over elements of fitness. Elements of fitness is chapter 8. Yeah, we're gonna take a break and we're gonna be right back to see how this is going like. Okay. It's a Monday, so nobody really wants to see like study on a Monday, you know? You know what I mean? All right. I'll be right back, dude. And I'm gonna connect this to like for real. Okay, elements of fitness. All right, now we are going over elements of fitness, chapter 8. Chapter 8 is going to be elements of fitness. First, let me, just out of curiosity, I want to see in the textbook, just in case, like, if they actually have those squat assessments in here. Head and neck, kinetic chain movements. Yeah, this is what we saw. But it doesn't have any information on the exam. There are the squat assessments. Common observations on a squat assessment include knee valgus, foreline excessive, lumbar spine upper extension, heel elevation, eversion of the foot, lateral weight shifting, which is the same as in this one. Foot pronation is the only one that is the foot torn out too. Anyways, dude, I'm just trying to look at it. That's like squat assessment observations. Knee valgus, foot torn out, forward lean, lumbar extension, heel elevation, foot pronation, lateral weight shift. Forward squat. Here is a physical activities ratings questionnaire. The other one was just a plain text form. All right. All right, dude, I'm tired of having to look at the same things, so I'm just gonna go over chapter 8, elements of fitness. All of these are the health history questionnaire. You actually have this on the website as well. Here it is too. Elements of fitness, chapter 8. Okay, elements of fitness, chapter 8. You have the components of fitness, which are the cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. Then you have elements of a fitness program, which is the warm up, flexibility training, core training, balance training, reactive training, resistance training, cardiorespiratory training, and finally the cool down. You cannot, you don't necessarily have to do all of them in one session, but the warm up and cool down, you always have to do warm up and cool down. General versus specific warm up. General, which is going to be like uh, overall body warm up, and then specific to what you're going to do. Then you have the maximum heart rate formula that is 220 minus the age, maximum heart rate formula. And three measurements used to determine intensity of cardiorespiratory training. That three measurements used to determine intensity of cardiorespiratory training. You have the THR, the target heart rate, the rate of perceived exertion, and the heart rate zones for objective assessments. So learning objectives. Name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. So name and describe the common goals, element of fitness. Learning objectives. Name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. List the elements of fitness program that should be incorporated for health and optimal physical performance and describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. So name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. That's the learning objective number one. Name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. Then list the elements of a fitness program that should be incorporated for health and optimal physical performance. List the elements of a fitness program that should be incorporated for health and optimal physical performance. And finally, describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. Describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. Oh my God. Yeah. So elements of fitness. Number one, name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. What are the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each? List the elements of a fitness program that should be incorporated for health and optimal physical performance. And finally, describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. Describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. 5 components of fitness. You have 5 components of fitness here. So name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. The common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. List the elements of a fitness program that should be incorporated for health and optimal physical performance and describe the components of each element. Describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. Describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. Yeah. So are going to be the 3 learning objectives for this one. So the components of fitness are going to be cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. The elements of a fitness program, you have the warm-up, the reactive training, the resistance training, the flexibility training, the core and cardiorespiratory training, the core training, cardiorespiratory training, the balance training, and the cool down. They can all impact how the components of fitness that we have. They can impact the components of fitness that we have. They all can impact the components of fitness that we have. They can impact the components of fitness that we have. Depend upon the client's goals whether to include all of them or just some of them. So can impact the components of fitness that we have. It depends upon the client's goals whether to include all of them or just some of them. The warm-up and the cool-down will always be used for a training program. The warm-up and the cool-down will always be used for a training program. Low intensity activity. So a low intensity for a training program. A low intensity activity general versus specific warm-up. For a low intensity activity, you have general versus a specific warm-up for a low intensity activity. You have a general warm-up and a specific warm-up. The total warm-up lasts between 10 to 15 minutes. Total warm-up needs to last between 10 to 15 minutes. Remember that. Total warm-up lasts between 10 to 15 minutes. General portion lasts between 5 to 10 minutes and is a low-intensity non-specific activity. The general portion lasts between 5 to 10 minutes and it is low intensity and non-specific. It is a low intensity non-specific activity like walking, jogging, uh, just generally warming up, doing the dynamic stretching. A specific warm-up is either dynamic stretching A specific warm-up is either dynamic stretching and unloaded exercises mimicking the loaded exercises we will perform that day. Lasts between 5 to 10 minutes. So general and specific lasts between 5 to 10 minutes. A total warm-up between 10 to 15 minutes. A specific warm-up is either a dynamic stretching and unloaded exercises mimicking the loaded exercises we will perform that day. It lasts between 5 to 10 minutes. Now, flexibility training. For flexibility training, you have a static versus dynamic stretching. Static stretching, dynamic stretching. You have PNF stretching, which is going to be cool down stretching. The PNF stretching is a cool down stretching, and myofascial release, which is going to be foam rolling. PNF stretching, which is a cool down stretching, and myofascial release is going to be foam rolling. For the core training, you have training that activates abdominal muscles, abductors, glutes, spinal erectors, and pelvic muscles. Activates muscles of our core, of our midsection. It's going to be core training. It activates the muscles of our core, midsection. In between, you have the abdominal muscles, the abductors, the glutes, the spinal erectors, and the pelvic muscles. And the pelvic muscles activates the muscles of our core, which is going to be the midsection. Activates the muscles of our core, which is going to be the midsection. The core is going to be the midsection. It's going to be the core training. Balance training uses unstable surfaces to improve the coordination of the clients. For balance training, ability of the body to remain upright and steady, use unstable surfaces to improve the client's coordination. It uses unstable surfaces to improve the client's coordination. The coordination of the client is balance training. Ability of the body to remain upright and steady is going to be balance. Ability of the body to remain upright and steady. It uses unstable surfaces to improve the coordination of clients. For reactive training, you have speed, agility, quickness, and plyometrics training for reactive training. Speed, agility, quickness, and plyometrics. For reactive training, you have SAQP. Speed, agility, quickness, and plyometrics, which is like hopping, jumping, clap, push-ups, etc. For reactive training, you have speed, agility, quickness, and plyometrics. Plyometrics training, which includes hopping, jumping, clap, push-ups, etc. as reactive training. Speed, agility, quickness, and plyometrics. For resistance training, it is used to improve maximal strength and endurance and muscle size and power. It's done with machine weights, with dumbbells, with medicine balls, with barbells, and with body weight. As resistance training, it's going to improve maximal strength and endurance and muscle size and power. The resistance training, it improves maximal strength, endurance. Resistance training is going to improve maximal strength and endurance and muscle size and power. Done with machine weight. It is done with machine weight, dumbbells, medicine balls, barbells, and body weight. It's going to be resistance training. Improves maximal strength and endurance and muscle size and power. Resistance training improves maximal strength and endurance and muscle size and power. Done with machine weights, dumbbells, medicine balls, barbells, and body weights. And body weight. Cardiorespiratory training is going to be the metrics. Cardiorespiratory training is used with target heart rate, rate of perceived exertion, and heart rate zones, and estimated maximum heart rates, which is going to be the rate of perceived exertion. So target heart rate zones, estimated maximum heart rates, and the rate of perceived exertion. It's going to be cardiorespiratory training. For cardiorespiratory training, you have the target heart rate, the THR, the rate of perceived exertion, the RPE, the heart rate, and the heart rate zones, and the heart rate zones, and the estimated maximum heart rate, and the heart rate zones, and estimated maximum heart rate, and the estimated maximum heart rate, which are all our metrics of the training, and the estimated maximum heart rate, which all are going to be metrics of the training. The estimated maximum heart rate, all are going to be metrics of the training. All are metrics of the training or the training. All are metrics or the training. All are metrics or the training. All are metrics or the training. Now, the estimated maximum heart rate is going to be the estimated maximum number of times the estimated maximum heart rate. The estimated maximum heart rate is the estimated maximum number of times the heart should beat per minute during exercise, calculated by subtracting a person's age from 220. So the estimated maximum heart rate is going to be the estimated maximum number of times the heart should beat per minute during exercise. That's the estimated maximum heart rate. The estimated maximum number of times the heart should beat per minute during an exercise, calculated by subtracting a person's age from 220. So estimated maximum heart rate is going to be the estimated maximum number of times the heart should beat per minute during an exercise, calculated by subtracting a person's age from 220. For me, times 25, it should be like about 195 times per minute. Number of times that heart should beat per minute during exercise, calculated by subtracting a person's age from 220. Now the cooldown is restores. The cooldown is going to restore homeostasis. The cooldown restores homeostasis, begins physical recovery, and focus mental energy. A cycle is going to be a cycle to prepare for the next training session. It's going to be the cooldown. It's going to restore homeostasis, begin physical recovery, and focus mental energy. It's going to be a cycle to prepare for the next training session. So restores homeostasis, begins physical recovery, and focus mental energy. So it's going to be a cycle to prepare for the next training session. And that was it for chapter 8. It's not that long. Now what I want to see here is going to be the elements of fitness. Chapter 8, elements of fitness. You have cardiovascular endurance. So again, what were the learning objectives? Name and describe the common goals of a fitness program and the elements of each. List the elements of a fitness program that should be incorporated for health and optimizing physical performance. And describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. And describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. These are elements of a fitness program that should be incorporated for health and optimal physical performance, and describe the components of each element of an effective fitness program. Fitness program. It's going to be elements of fitness. And we go more into detail in chapters 10, 11, 12, and 12, pretty much, which is going to be the flexibility training, cardiovascular training, and muscle training, and endurance training. Sorry, for endurance training. The 5 components of fitness: cardiovascular endurance, a measure of the cardiovascular distance performed over a time period, muscular strength, so for the resistance over time, flexibility, and tension. Is key, is a key, is a key to balanced, is a key to balanced well-being, to balanced well-being, well-being. So in here, so those are going to be the elements of fitness. The 5 components of fitness is going to be cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. So what is cardiovascular endurance, you ask? It's going to be the measure of the cardiovascular system's heart and blood vessels' ability to perform over a extended period. The measure of the cardiovascular system's heart and blood vessels' ability to perform over an extended period. Muscular strength is the measure of force produced by a muscle or group of muscles. Muscular endurance is going to be the ability of muscle or group of muscles to continuously exert force against resistance over time. Against resistance over time. Now, flexibility is going to be the range of motion of a muscle and associated connective tissues at the joint or joints. Flexibility is going to be the range of motion of a muscle and its associated connective tissues at a joint or joints. And finally, body composition is going to be the physical makeup of the body considering fat mass and lean mass. So body composition is going to be the physical makeup of the body considering fat mass and lean mass. Body composition, the physical makeup of the body considering fat mass and lean mass. Show me the definitions right there. Now, the 8 elements of a fitness program. The 8 elements of the fitness program here, they are the list the 8 elements of a list and explain the 8 elements of the fitness program, the warm-up, necessary for preparing the body for activity or training. General warm-up is simple and will increase blood flow, respiration, body temperature, and aerobic activation of the major muscle groups. For example, a warm-up consist of walking on a treadmill or riding a stationary bike for 5 minutes before a training session. A specific warm-up intentionally mimics movements that will be part of the workout or activity. In this way, specific movements partners the tissues associated with others with those movements patterns uh, specific movement patterns and the tissues associated with those movement patterns are prepared for the upcoming activity. Warm-ups may include variations of dynamic stretching and light cardiovascular activity. Warm-ups may include variations of dynamic stretching and light cardiovascular activity. Dude, what the fuck happened here? Ah, there it is. So the 5 components of fitness program is cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. And the 8 components of fitness training: warm-up, flexibility training, core training, balance training, reactive training, resistance training, cardiorespiratory training, and cool down. The free measurements used to determine intensity of heart rate, perceived exertion, and heart rate zones. So the 8 elements of a fitness program: the warm-up necessary for preparing the body for the activity, the 3 elements of the fitness program, the 8 elements of the fitness program. It's going to be the warm-up necessary for preparing the body for an activity or training. A warm is simple and will increase blood flow, respiration, body temperature, and aerobic activation for the muscle. For the major muscle groups. For example, a warm-up consists of walking in a treadmill or riding a stationary bike for 5 minutes before a training session. A specific warm-up intentionally mimics movements that will be part of the workout or activity. In this way, specific movement patterns and the tissues associated with those movement patterns are prepared for the upcoming activity. Warm-ups may include variations of dynamic stretching. Warm-ups may include variations of dynamic stretching and light cardiovascular activity. Now, the flexibility training is going to be an element of fitness using stretching to increase the range of motion of a joint or group of joints and allow for increased ranges of motion. Static stretching is ideal for a cool down rather than a warm-up protocol. It has been shown to change the length-tension relationship of a muscle fiber, which can increase the risk of injury or alter performance if it is done before an activity. If it is done before an activity. If, if it is done before an activity. Now, the core training before an activity. Core training refers to strength and activity. Before an activity. Now, core training refers to the strengthening of the musculature. Core training refers to the strengthening of the core training refers to the strengthening the musculature of core training refers to strengthening the musculature of the abdominals, the back, and the lower body that directly influence the lumbopelvic hip complex. It's going to be LPHC. The abdominal muscles aren't the only muscles included in the core. The abdominal muscles aren't the only muscles included in the core. So core training involves more than just targeted abdominal work. The abdominal muscles aren't the only muscles included in the core. So core training involves more than just targeted abdominal work. So the abdominal muscles aren't the only muscles included in the core. So core training involves more than just targeted abdominal work. Core training refers to strengthening the musculature of the abdominals, the back, and the lower body that directly influence the lumbopelvic hip complex. The abdominal muscles aren't the only muscles included in the core. So core training involves more than just targeted abdominal work. Now, in here you have the balance training that involves manipulating and stimulating sensory systems to change the ability to maintain one center of gravity and remain upright. In, these systems upright. These systems involve visual, vestibular, or inner ear. These systems involve visual, vestibular, or inner ear, and somatosensory. These systems involve visual, vestibular, or inner ear, or somatosensory, manipulating the body position or using an unstable surface. Manipulating the body position or using an unstable surface. Now, surface. Reacting surface. Reacting surface. Reactive training is going to include quick, powerful movements. Reactive training is going to include Reactive training is going to include quick, powerful movements with an eccentric action followed by an immediate concentric action. Trains the body to be explosive, fast, and agile. Speed, agility, and quickness are required for most athletic endeavors. They also include plyometrics training. Reactive training seeking maximum force in the shortest amount of time. Uh, Plyometrics exercises increases muscle power and by enhancing the stretch shortening cycle. The stretch shortening cycle is an almost instantaneous cycle of muscle actions made up of three phases: the eccentric contraction phase, the amortization phase, and the concentric contraction phase. That's going to be for the reactive training. Now, the resistance training is going to be the category of training that includes physical activity designing. The The resistance training is going to be the category of training that includes the physical activities designed to increase muscle mass, improve strength, muscular endurance, or muscular power. It involves exercises with explicit intent of increasing strength, endurance, muscle size, hypertrophy, or power. To promote muscular adaptation, the resistance training must be challenging enough to tear the muscle fiber. The resistance training is going to be the category of training that includes physical activities designed to increase muscle mass, improve strength, muscular endurance, or muscular power. It involves exercises with explicit intent to increase in size, strength, to increase in strength, endurance, muscle size, hypertrophy, or power. To promote muscular adaptation, the resistance training must be challenging enough to tear the muscle fiber. To promote muscular adaptation, the resistance training must be challenging enough to tear the muscle fiber. Now, in here you have the cardiorespiratory training. In here you have the cardiorespiratory training, which is going to be the training of the cardiorespiratory system requires continuous rhythmic exercises involving large muscle groups. The body's response to exercise is directly proportional. The body's response to exercise is directly proportional to the oxygen demands of the skeletal muscles. The body's response to exercise is directly proportional to the oxygen demands of the skeletal muscles. Going to be cardiorespiratory training. The training of the cardiorespiratory system, re- uh, training the cardiorespiratory system requires continuous rhythmic exercises involving large muscle groups. The body's response to exercise is directly proportional. The body's response to exercise is directly proportional to the oxygen demands of the skeletal muscles. When the exercise intensity is low, oxygen uptake and cardiac output is low. When intensity increases, oxygen uptake and cardiac output increase to match. It uses the target heart rate, the rate of perceived exertion, RPE, and the heart rate zones to determine intensity and drive physiological adaptations. To determine the intensity and drives physiological adaptations. We're gonna go more over it on chapter 10. It's gonna be that cardiorespiratory exercises and drive physiological adaptations. And finally the cool down is going to be gradually slowing the body after activity to return to homeostasis or close to homeostasis. That's the cool down, right? Slowing the body after activity to return to homeostasis or close to homeostasis. Taking time to slow down and reduce the resistance of exercise before ending a training session allows the body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing rate to return to a level closer to normal. This is an ideal time to static stretch to a level to a sorry, to return to a level closer to normal. This is an ideal time. This is an ideal time to static stretch. This is an ideal time to static stretch and perform self-myofascial release techniques to promote muscle recovery and optimal length tension relationships with the muscle fibers. This is an ideal time to static stretch and perform self-myofascial release techniques to promote muscle recovery an optimal length tension relationships with muscle fibers, length tension relationships with muscle fiber, relationships within muscle fibers, optimal length tension relationships within muscle fibers, within muscle fibers. Period. Within the muscle fibers. Within the muscle fibers. Period. All right. What formula is used to estimate the maximum target heart rate? So what formula is used to estimate the maximum target heart rate? So what formula is used to estimate the maximum heart rate? What formula is used to estimate the maximum heart rate? The estimated maximum heart rate is estimated maximum number of times the heart should beat per minute during an exercise. So what formula is used to estimate the maximum heart rate? The estimated maximum heart rate is the estimated maximum number of times the heart should beat per minute during exercise. It is calculated by subtracting a person's age from 220. Calculated by subtracting a person's age from 220. So that maximum heart rate is estimated maximum number of times the heart should beat per minute during exercise. That's calculated by subtracting a person's age from 220. Now, what free measurements that are used? What free measurements are used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory training? The free measurements used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory training. So now you have the free measurements that are used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory training. Cardiorespiratory training uses target heart rate, rates of perceived exertion, and heart rate zones to determine the intensity and drive physiological adaptations. Cardiorespiratory training uses the target heart rate, the rates of perceived exertion, and the heart rate zones to determine the intensity and drive physiological adaptations. The free measurements used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory training. Respiratory training uses target heart rate, rates of perceived exertion, and the heart rate zones to determine the intensity and drive physiological adaptations. To determine intensity and drive physiological adaptations. The target heart rate is estimated beats per minute that needs to be reached to achieve specific exercise intensity. The target heart rate is estimated beats per minute. Target heart rate is the estimated beats per minute that needs to be reached to achieve specific exercise intensity. To achieve a specific exercise intensity, the rate of perceived exertion is a subjective sliding scale of a client's perception of their exercise intensity. That's the rate of perceived exertion, the subjective sliding scale of a client's perception of their exercise intensity. And the heart rate zones is the percentage of maximum heart rate associated with desired physiological adaptations, the heart rate zones. The percentages of the maximum heart rate associated with the desired physiological adaptations, the heart rate zones. The percentages of the maximum heart rate associated with the desired physiological adaptations, the heart rate zones. Percentages of the maximum heart rate associated with the desired physiological adaptation. So the free measurements used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory training, you have the cardiorespiratory training uses the target heart rate, perceived exertion, and heart rate zones to estimate intensity and drive its physiological adaptations. Target heart rate is estimated beats per minute that needs to be reached. To achieve a specific exercise intensity, rate of perceived exertion is a subjective sliding scale of a client's perception of their exercise intensity. And finally, the heart rate zones is going to be the percentage of the maximum heart rate associated with the desired physiological adaptation. Heart rate zones is going to be the percentage of the maximum heart rate associated with a desired physiological adaptation. Physiological adaptation. Video. See it. And all of this is going to be in the cardiorespiratory training chapter, bro, so don't worry about it. Don't stress about it too much, please. Very cool. It's going to be very objective. Finally, the heart rate zones, the percentages of maximum heart rate with a desired physiological adaptation. Video adaptation. It's gonna be period right there. Period and principles of program design is gonna be chapter 9. First, I wanna see like client assessments. All of this is gonna be so freaking long, dude. Okay. Now we go over the principles of program design, chapter 9, which is not that like it's very specific. So, the principles of program design is very specific. You have the acute training variable, which is about 12 acute training variables that you can see here. You have the detail how an exercise is performed. You have type, exercise selection, exercise order, intensity, sets, repetition, frequency, range of motion, time, tempo, and time retention and rest. You have 12 acute training variables. Then you have the fitness program design. Then you have the fitness program design. You have to learn all of those. The fitness program design. Fitness program design. You have the exercise periodization, the definition for overtraining. What is overtraining? Then you have the 5 Rs, the range of motion, resistance, repetition, rest, and recovery. The training goal variables, which is going to be strength, muscular endurance, hypertrophy, and power. The training goal variables, which is going to be strength, muscular endurance, hypertrophy, and power. You have the fit principle, the principle of specificity, uh, the principle of variability, the principle of individual differences, the principle of progressive overload, principle of reversibility, the gas and set principle, the general adaptation syndrome principle, and Specific adaptation to impose demands principle. Periodization is going to be micro, meso, and macro cycles. Programming with periodization and training categories. Programming with periodization, stable to unstable, and then the training categories. It's going to be foundational training, strength training, metabolic training, and speed agility and quickness training. Plyometrics training, part of the reactive training. Part of the reactive training. I mean, this is going to be principles of program design chapter. This chapter, actually, if you look at the candidate handbook, is is part of the program design and implementation session of the task of the examination weight of 25%. And in the workbook, you have okay training variables. You have all the definition of the principles of origin and overactive. So it's very straightforward. This is very straightforward. It should not be that complicated. So let's get ready for it. And this is my business card. I already ordered it, by the way. So hopefully the business starts growing at some point in the future. Of course, I need to do a good job about it. But also, I also wanted to see before continuing the in here. Yeah, we just finished chapter 7 and 8. Now we're gonna do chapter 9. You have careers, so the 35 personal training form. You have the client assessments, the client dietary worksheet, the medical release, the client intake forms. Here they are. All of the client intake forms are here. Three-day dietary record. The physical activity readiness questionnaire. And we're going to start chapter 9. Extension. Okay. For the next training session. Okay, I'll be right back. We're already like halfway done though. That is amazing. This should be like very basic though. That's the thing. So yeah, I'll go over principle of problem design a bit. Take a break right now. It's gonna take like an hour more, and then I don't know how long it's gonna take the the quiz because the quiz had a lot of information that is related to what we are gonna see in the chapters anyway. So yeah. Okay. Weird. So freaking weird. Anyways, principles of program design is going to be chapter 9. Cool. All right, principles of program design. You have all that right here. It's really short. I like it. It's really short. It's only like one page. All right. So I could prepare for the next training session. Principles of program design. Yeah. The full and ankle, knee, hips, spine, shoulders, and head and neck. Escape poses, scoliosis. Why am I doing this, bro? My brain just doesn't want to leave me alone, I swear. I already saw all this, bro. Cardiovascular endurance, much of the cardiovascular period. For strength, that measure of force by muscles, muscle endurance, time. Then flexibility is going to be the range of motion of muscle and its associated connective tissues at a joint or joints. And finally, the body composition is going to be the physical makeup of the body, considering fat mass and lean mass. And lean mass. The physical makeup of the body, considering fat mass and lean mass. Very well, composition, the physical makeup of the body, considering fat mass and lean mass. There you go, graph. Video. Yeah. Okay, let's go, graph. The principles of program design. That's going to be chapter 9. Principles of program design. All right, principles of program design. List and describe the principles of program design. And the maximum heart rate, metrics of training, or the training should be per minute during the exercise. It's going to be calculated by subtracting the person's age from 220. Now the cool down restores homeostasis, begins physical recovery and focus mental energy, a cycle to prepare for the next training session. All right, focus on chapter 9, the principles of program design. Chapter 9, principles of program design. The learning objectives are going to be to list and describe the most common acute training variables in fitness. Principles of program design. Learning objectives. List and describe the most common acute training variables in fitness. The most common acute variables in fitness. Describe the most common types of exercise periodization. Describe the most common types of exercise periodization and define overtraining and identify common symptoms of overtraining. Now, acute training variables are going to be training variables that we can manipulate in every session, in every training session, and from exercise to exercise. It's going to be training variables that we can manipulate in every training session and from exercise to exercise. They're going to be type, exercise selection, order, intensity, sets, repetitions, frequency, range of motion, time, tempo, time under tension, and rest. Variables by training goal is going to be strength, muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. The variables by training goal are going to be the fitness program design. The variables by training goal is going to be strength, muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. The variables by training goal. You have the training goal of strength, of muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. the variables by training goal. The variables by training goal, they're going to be the strength, muscular endurance, hypertrophy, and power. You have strength, muscular endurance, hypertrophy, and power, but in this case, you don't simply have strength, muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. The training goal strength, you have a tempo of 2-0 and 2-0. For strength, you have repetitions from 1 to 5. In volume, 3 to 5 sets. In rest, you have from 1 to 3 minutes. And time under tension, less than 20 seconds. For muscular endurance, you have a tempo of 6-0-4-0. Repetitions you have for muscular endurance more than 13. Volume is 1 to 3 sets for muscular endurance. Rest from 1 to 2 minutes. And time under tension, you have more than 70 seconds of time under tension for muscular endurance. And finally, for hypertrophy, you have a tempo of 3-1-3-1, a repetitions of 3 to 12 sets of repetition for hypertrophy, volume of 3 to 4 sets in volume. Then you have a rest time of 1 to 3 minutes like strength, and a time under tension of 40 seconds. Let's do this again. So variables by training goal, you have strength, muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. For strength, you have a tempo of 2-0-2-0. Repetitions 1 to 5 repetitions for strength. Volume 3 to 5 sets. Rest from 1 to 3 minutes, and time under tension is less than 20 seconds for strength. For muscular endurance, you have a tempo of for muscular endurance, you have a tempo of 6-0-4-0 for muscular endurance. Tempo of 6-0-4-0, repetitions is going to be more than 13. Volume of 1 to 3 sets. The lowest volume is going to be muscular endurance, 1 to 3 sets for muscular endurance. Rest from 1 to 2 minutes. And time under tension is the longest, it's more than 70 seconds of time under tension for muscular endurance. And finally, for hypertrophy, you have a tempo of 3-1-3-1 for hypertrophy, which is the making of muscle mass. Hypertrophy, you have a tempo of 3-1-3-1. Repetitions, you go from 6 to 12 repetitions for muscle hypertrophy, from 6 to 12 repetitions. Volume, you go from 3 to 4 sets for volume of hypertrophy, 3 to 4 sets of volume for hypertrophy. Rest from 1 to 3 minutes, and a time under tension is going to be exactly 40 seconds of time under tension for hypertrophy. You're right in the middle. The 5 R's is going to be range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. Resistance, repetitions, range of motion, rest, and recovery. So they're going to be the 5 R's. Range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. The variables by training goal is going to be strength, muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. The training goal is going to be tempo, repetitions, volume, rest, and time under tension. The variables by training goal is going to be strength, muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. Also, you have power, and then the training goal is going to be tempo, repetitions, volume, and rest and hypertrophy. The variables of training goal is going to be strength, muscular endurance, and hypertrophy. Training goal, you're going to have tempo, repetitions, volume, rest, and time under tension for the variables. For the variables, yeah. Training muscular endurance and hypertrophy, and the training goal is going to be tempo, repetitions, volume, rest, and time under tension. The 5 R's is going to be the 5 R's of the 5 R's for the training goals are going to be the range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. The 5 R's. The 5 R's are going to be range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. The 5 R's. Range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. Range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. The 5 R's. Range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. The 5 R's is range of motion, resistance, repetitions, rest, and recovery. The fit principle is going to be frequency, type, time, and frequency, intensity, type, and time. Frequency, type, time, and intensity. That's the fit principle. Frequency, type, time, and intensity. Fit principle is the frequency, the type, the time, and the intensity. The principles of fitness, you have different principles of fitness. You have the principle of specificity, the fit principle, the specific adaptation to imposed demands principle, the principle of variability, the principle of individual differences, of progressive overload, the principle of reversibility, the specific adaptation to impulse demands principle, the set principle, and the general adaptation principle, the gas principle. The general adaptation syndrome. And the general adaptation syndrome is going to be the gas principle. The general adaptation syndrome is going to be that gas principle. The general adaptation syndrome is going to be the gas principle. Yeah, videos. The gas principle. Now, periodization. What is periodization? It's a plan. The periodization is a plan of manipulation. Periodization is a plan of manipulation. That's going to be periodization. The definition of periodization is going to be a plan of manipulation. Ideal training periodization will be based on the client's goals and timeline. The periodization is going to be a plan of manipulation. Ideal training periodization will be based on the client's goals and timeline. A plan of manipulation. The ideal training periodization will be based on the client's goals and timeline. So you have three cycles of periodization. You have the macro cycle with each 1 year or the entire duration of the program. You have the meso cycle, which is going to be short-term training goals lasting from 1 to 3 months. So it's going to be like 1/4 of the macro cycle. Shorter training goals lasting from 1 to 3 months. Example, beginning client has to take 1 to 2 months will be placed on a basic exercise. The beginning client from 1 to 2 months will be placed on a basic exercise. The beginning client from 1 to 2 months will be placed on a basic exercise. And finally, the microcycles is going to be 1 week training period with the client. The microcycles is going to be 1 week of training period with the client. It's going to be the microcycle. The microcycles is going to be 1 week of training period with the client. It's going to be 1 week. Microcycles is going to be 1 week training period with the client. Now, programming with periodization. Programming with periodization. Start simple and progress into dynamic periodization. So programming with periodization. Programming with periodization is going to be start simple and progress into dynamic periodization. Programming with periodization is going to start simple and it progresses into dynamic periodization. Start simple and progresses into dynamic periodization. So in this case, you go from stable to unstable. Prevents overtraining. Programming with periodization starts simple and progresses into dynamic periodization. It prevents overtraining. So you go from stable to unstable, from static to dynamic, from unloaded to loaded, from slow to fast, and from simple to complex. That's programming with periodization. Starts simple and progresses into dynamic periodization, prevents overtraining, stable to unstable, static to dynamic, unloaded to loaded, slow to fast, and simple to complex. Overtraining, it prevents overtraining, like you say. Overtraining is going to be an accumulation of stress which results in long-term decrease in performance capacity. Overtraining, the definition of is going to be overtraining is going to be accumulation of stress, which results in a long-term decrease in performance capacity. Overtraining is an accumulation of stress which results in a long-term decrease in performance capacity. Now, the signs and symptoms of overtraining are going to be the physical performance declines, the muscle cramps, the changes in appetite, irritability and restlessness, weight loss, weight loss, loss of motivation or vigor in training, loss of motivation or vigor in training, sleep disturbances and lack of mental focus and elevated heart rate. Those are going to be the overtraining signs and symptoms. Physical performance declines, muscle cramps, changes in appetite, irritability and restlessness, weight loss, loss of motivation or vigor in training, sleep disturbances, and lack of mental focus and elevated heart rate. Elevated heart rate is going to be the overtraining signs and symptoms. So the condition of stress, which results in a long-term decrease in performance capacity. Is overtraining, an accumulation of stress, which results in a long-term decrease in performance capacity. Overtraining signs and symptoms is going to be physical performance declines, muscle cramps, changes in appetite, irritability and restlessness, weight loss, loss of motivation or vigor in training, sleep disturbances, lack of mental focus, and elevated heart rate. Those are going to be some of the symptoms of overtraining. The focus and elevated heart rate. And finally, the training categories. The training categories, you have four training categories: foundational training, strength training, metabolic training, and speed, agility, and quickness training or reactive training. Plyometric training, ballistic, plyometric, and agility training. So the foundational training is going to be the flexibility, core, and balance training. It's going to be foundational training. Fitness program and elements and types. For foundational training, you have the flexibility, the core, and the balance training. For strength training, you only have resistance training. For strength training, you have the resistance training. For metabolic training, you have the metabolic training, you have cardiorespiratory training, and high intensity interval training or HIIT training is going to be part of the metabolic training. Cardiorespiratory training and high intensity interval training or HIIT training. And speed, agility, and quickness training, you have reactive, ballistic, plyometric, and agility training. You have reactive, ballistic, plyometrics, and agility training. For speed, agility, and quickness training, you have reactive, ballistic, plyometric, and agility training. And that was it for the training categories. For national training, you have flexibility, core, and balance training. For strength training, you have resistance training. For metabolic training, you have cardiorespiratory training and high intensity interval training. And speed, agility, and quickness training, you have reactive, ballistic, plyometric, and agility training. Reactive, ballistic, plyometric, and agility training. I want to see the definition of ballistic training just in case. In here, hold up. Ballistic training is going to be also incorrectly referred to power training. It's a form of training which involves throwing weights and jumping with weights in order to increase explosive power. Exactly. Ballistic training. This increases explosive power. Ballistic training. So yeah, that was it for chapter 9. That was it for chapter 9. Now, now we're gonna go over in the workbook, which is pretty much the same. Principles of program design, the principles of program design in the workbook. You have the acute training variables. What are acute training variables? Details how an exercise is performed. How are you guys doing this? I like that I'm 2 hours in, so that means that I'm about to finish chapter 9 and we are uh, like 3 chapters in about 2.5 hours. It's a good time, you know. So principles of program design. What are principles of program design, you ask? We're almost done too. The principles of program design. You have the acute training variables, which detail how an exercise is performed. They are the most fundamental components of designing training programs, and they are essentially what drive the potential adaptation of the body. To understand the principles of fitness, a fitness professional must first understand the acute training variables, which are the components that specify how an exercise or training program is performed. So acute training variables detail how an exercise is performed. They are the most fundamental components of designing training programs, and they are essentially what drive the potential adaptations of the body. To understand what the principles of fitness, a fitness professional must first understand acute training variables, which are the components that specify how an exercise or training program is performed. So you have 12 acute training variables. Explain the following acute training variables. You have 12. You have type, the techniques, equipment, or methods used to complete an activity. You have the exercise selection, the specific exercises executed in a workout session, the exercise selection, the specific exercises executed in a workout session. You have the exercise order, the order in which exercises are completed within a training session. Then you have intensity, the measurable amount of force or effort given to an activity or exercise. Intensity, the measurable amount of force or effort given to an activity or exercise. The sets, the number of times an exercise or group of exercise supersets completed as a set. The number of times an exercise or group of exercises supersets is completed. The repetitions is going to be the number of times an exercise is completed within a set. It's going to be repetitions. The number of times an exercise is completed within a set. Those are repetitions. The number of times an exercise is completed within a set. That's going to be repetitions. The number of times an exercise is completed within a set. Now, that's going to be repetitions. The number of times an exercise is completed within a set. Now, the number of The number of times an exercise is completed within a set. So many repetitions. Now, the frequency is the number of times training occurs within a specific period, the number of times how often the exercise is executed. The frequency, how many times you do an exercise, the number of times the training occurs within a specific period, or the number of times or how often an exercise is executed. The range of motion, the amount of movement in a joint measured in degrees, the measurement in movement around a specific joint or body part, the amount of movement in a joint measured in degrees, so it's going to be the measurement of movement around a specific joint or body part, the measurement of movement around a specific joint or body part. It's going to be the range of motion. The time is going to be the duration of an activity or training session. It's going to be the time. The duration of an activity or training session, that's going to be the time. The tempo, the speed at which exercise or movement pattern is completed. That's going to be tempo. The speed at which an exercise or movement pattern is completed. How fast you do it. The tempo. The speed at which an exercise or movement pattern is completed. Time, the duration of an activity or training session. And tempo. Tempo is going to be the speed at which exercise or movement pattern is completed. The tempo. The speed at which an exercise or movement pattern is completed. That's going to be the tempo. The speed at which an exercise or movement pattern is completed. Tempo, the speed at which an exercise or movement pattern is completed. Time under tension directly related to tempo. The amount of time a muscle is engaged or under tension in a set, completed from start to finish. And the rest is the amount of time spent in recovery between sets of repetitions. So the tempo is the speed at which an exercise or movement pattern is completed. An exercise movement pattern is completed. The time under tension is going to be directly related to tempo, the amount of time a muscle is engaged or under tension in a set, completed from start to finish, and finally the rest is going to be the amount of time spent in recovery between sets of repetitions. It's going to be the rest. The amount of time spent in recovery, the amount of time spent in recovery between sets or repetitions. Repetitions. So the appropriate number of sets by training goal. Here it is. The appropriate number of sets by training goal. So identify the appropriate number of sets, the appropriate number of repetitions, and the appropriate rest between sets by training goal. So for muscular endurance, the appropriate number of sets by training goal, for muscular endurance, you have 1 to 3 sets. For hypertrophy, you have 3 to 4 sets. For muscular endurance, you have 1 to 3 sets. For hypertrophy, in the volume, you have 3 to 4 sets. For strength, maximum strength and power, you have 3 to 5 sets. Muscular endurance, 1 to 3 sets. Hypertrophy, 3 to 4 sets. Max strength and power, 3 to 5 sets. Appropriate number of repetitions by training goal. For muscular endurance, you have 15 or more repetitions for muscular endurance. For hypertrophy, 6 to 12 repetitions. For maximum strength, you have 1 to 6 repetitions. And power, you have 1 to 5 repetitions. Muscular endurance, 1 to 15 or more repetitions. Hypertrophy, 6 to 12. Maximum strength, 1 to 6. And power, 1 to 5 repetitions. And the appropriate rest between sets by training goal. The appropriate rest between sets by training goal for muscular endurance, you have from muscular endurance, the rest is going to be 30 seconds to 60 seconds. For hypertrophy, you have 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Max strength, you have 2 to 5 minutes. And power, you have 1 to 2 minutes. For endurance and hypertrophy, the amount of rest is going to be the appropriate rest is going to be from 30 to 60 seconds for muscular endurance and hypertrophy. For maximum strength, you have from 2 to 5 minutes of rest for maximum strength, and for power, you have 1 to 2 minutes for power. So yeah, within a set, muscular endurance, you have 1 to 3 sets, hypertrophy 3 to 4, max strength, you have 3 to 5 sets, and power 3 to 5 sets. Number of repetitions by training goal in muscular endurance 15 or more repetitions, hypertrophy 6 to 12 repetitions, maximum strength, you have 1 to 6 repetitions, power 1 to 5 repetitions. Appropriate rest between sets by training goal. Appropriate rest between sets by training goal. For muscular endurance, you have 30 to 60 seconds. For hypertrophy, you also have 30 to 60 seconds of rest. Maximum strength from 2 to 5 minutes of rest for maximum strength. And for power, you have 1 to 2 minutes of rest for power. For power. Now the principles. First is going to be the principle of specificity. Define the principle of specificity. Training must be specific to one's goals and sports, as the adaptations they will see will be based on the type of training completed. All clients should begin with training that is right for their current fitness level. As fitness develops, they may progress to advanced exercise or exercise techniques. As fitness develops, they may progress to advanced exercises or exercise techniques. They may progress to advanced exercises or exercise techniques. Or exercise techniques. Must be specific to one's principle of specificity. Training must be specific to one's goals and sports, as the adaptations they will see will be based on the type of training completed. All clients should begin with training that is right for their current fitness level. As fitness develops, they may progress to advanced exercises or exercise techniques. The set principle is going to be the specific adaptation to impose demands principle, reinforces the principle specificity, specific adaptations to impose demands, stress on the human systems, whether biomechanical or neurological, require the body to adapt specifically to those demands. Performance is dependent upon the body adapting to those specific demands and becoming stronger, faster, leaner, or more powerful. It's going to be the set principle. The principle of individual differences is the concept that there is no one specific way to train every client due to the uniqueness of each person. It's going to be the principle of individual differences. The concept that there is no one specific way to train every client due to the uniqueness of each person. Based on genetics, it's going to be based on genetics in science. Everyone responds to exercises differently. This is why you should create individualized programs for each client. Now, the principle of progressive overload is going to be the body must be forced to adapt or to overcome a stress greater than what is normally encountered. So the principle of progressive overload. The principle of progressive overload, the body must be forced to adapt or to overcome a stress that is greater than what is normally encountered. Progressive overload must be incremental to be effective. Progressive overload must be incremental to be effective. This applies not only to resistance, training, but also to various exercise methods and variables like the range of motion, the training volume, the training density, and the frequency. The principle of progressive overload is going to be that the body must adapt, must be forced. The principle of progressive overload is that the body must be forced to adapt to overcome. The principle of progressive overload, the body must be forced to adapt to or to overcome a stress that is greater than what is normally encountered. The progressive overload must be incremental to be effective. The progressive overload must be incremental to be effective. This applies not only to resistance. This applies not only to resistance training, but also to various exercise methods and variables like the range of motion, the training volume, the intensity, the training density, and frequency. The principle of progressive overload, the body must be forced to adapt to or overcome a stress that is greater than what is normally encountered. Progressive overload must be incremental to be effective. This applies not only to resistance training, but also to various methods and variables like the range of motion, the training volume, the intensity, the training density, and the frequency. Training density, frequency, training density, and frequency. Name the stages of the gas principle and give an explanation of each. Name the stages of the gas principle. Name the stages of the gas principle and give a name the stages of the gas principle and give a brief name the stages of the gas principle and give a brief explanation of each. Name the stages of the gas principle and give a brief explanation of each. Name the stages of the gas principle and give a brief explanation of each. So there are three stages of adaptation the body goes through in response to stress is going to be alarm, resistance, and exhaustion for the general adaptation syndrome. Alarm stage. The alarm stage is the body's initial response to stress. Symptoms include fatigue, weakness, or soreness. Individuals will see gains in strength, but mostly through neuromuscular changes. This stage may last from 2 to 3 weeks. Resistance stage, after continuous exercise, the body will enter a resistance stage around 4 to 6 weeks. At this point, the change in the body include the changes in the body include biochemical, mechanical, include biochemical, mechanical, and structural. Biochemical, mechanical, and structural. Include biochemical, mechanical, and structural. Clients may experience improvements in muscle size and strength. Clients may experience improvements. Clients may experience improvements in muscle size and strength. Around 4 to 6 weeks. At this point, the changes in the body include biochemical, biochemical, mechanical, and structural. The clients may experience improvements. The clients may experience improvements in the muscle size and strength. The clients may experience improvements in the muscle size and strength. And finally, the exhaustion stage, the exhaustion stage may happen at any time in the gas principle. Symptoms in this stage mimic those of the alarm stage, but without adequate rest or recovery. The client may experience burnout, overtraining, injury, or illness. Or illness. Idiot. Name the free Name the free periods of the training periodization and the length of each. We're almost done, bro. Name the free periods of the training periodization and the length of each. The free periods of the training periodization and the length of each. To periodize a training program means to break it into. To periodize a training program, it means to break it into 3 different phases, each of which is designed to elicit the specific physiological adaptations. 3 periods of the training periodization is going to be the macro cycle, 1 to 4 years long, the overall training program as a whole. The mesocycle is going to be a short-term training goal lasting from 1 to 3 months, a training phase in the annual training plan made up of 3 to 9 microcycles. A microcycle is going to be a 1 week long cycle of training sessions or a single session, the shortest training cycle of the free cycle. So the free periods, name the free periods of the training periodization and the length of each. To periodize the training program is to break it into different phases, each of which is designed to elicit a specific physiological adaptations. The free periods of the training periodization, the free periods of the training periodization is going to be the free periods of the training periodization are going to be the macro cycle, which is 1 to 4 years long, the overall training program as a whole, the mesocycle, which is going to be a short-term training goals lasting from 1 to 3 months, a training phase in the annual training plan made up of 3 to 9 microcycles. Microcycle is going to be a 1 week long microcycle is going to be a 1 week long cycle, a 1 week long cycle of training sessions or a single session. The shortest training cycle of the free cycles is going to be the microcycle. The microcycle. Now, filling the following training progressions, you have from stable to unstable, the training progressions, from stable to unstable, from static to dynamic, from unloaded to loaded, from slow to fast, and from simple to complex. Those are going to be the training progressions, from stable to unstable, from static to dynamic, from unloaded to loaded, uh, from slow to fast, and from simple to complex. Now define overreaching and overtraining. Define overreaching and overtraining. Overreaching is a cumulative training effect in which a stressor causes short-term decrease in performance capacity. Overreaching is a cumulative training effect in which stressors cause a short-term decrease in performance capacity. So overreaching is going to be an accumulative training effect in which a stressor causes a short-term decrease in performance capacity. An accumulation of training or non-training stress resulting in a short-term decrease in performance capacity. But overtraining is an accumulation of training or non-training stress resulting in a long-term decrease in performance capacity. So overreaching is going to be short-term decrease in performance capacity. Overtraining is going to be long-term decrease in performance capacity. So yeah, overreaching is a cumulative training effect in which stressors cause a short-term decrease in performance capacity, an accumulation of training or non-training stress resulting in a short-term decrease in performance capacity that's going to be overreaching. Overtraining is an accumulation of training or non-training stress, resulting in a long-term decrease in performance capacity. That's the big difference. That's the big difference, and that's period, and that's it, bro. Now, identify the elements of fitness associated. Identify the elements of fitness, the training categories associated with each training category. Identify the elements of fitness associated with each training category. Identify the elements of fitness associated with each training category. Identify the elements of fitness associated with each training category. You have four training categories: foundational training, strength training, metabolic training, and speed, agility, and fitness training. That's four training categories. Foundational training, strength training, metabolic training, and speed, agility, and quickness training. So identify the elements of fitness associated with each training category. For foundational training, you have the fitness program elements and types. You have the flexibility training, core training, and balance training for foundational training. Flexibility training, core training, and balance training. For strength training, you have resistance training. For metabolic training, you have high intensity interval training, heat training, and cardiorespiratory training. And for speed, agility, and quickness training, you have reactive training, ballistic training, plyometrics training, and agility training. For speed, agility, and quickness training, you have reactive training, ballistic training, plyometrics training, and agility training. And then you go over concepts of flexibility. It's really fast, dude. You only have two there. So the elements of fitness associated with each training category. So once again, the elements of fitness associated with each training category. For functional training, you have flexibility training, core training, and balance training. For strength training, you have resistance training. For metabolic training, you have the heat training, high intensity interval training, and cardiorespiratory training for metabolic training. And for speed, agility, and quickness training, you have reactive training, ballistic training, plyometric training, and agility training. And that's it, bro. And then you go over concepts of flexibility. That was it for chapter 9. The next step after the break is going to be going over the quizzes for chapter 7, 8, and 9 specifically. And while we go over the quizzes, we're also going to go over different notes that we were able to take for the chapter, for the chapters, for the client assessments. And that's a lot of information, by the way. So we're gonna take about like 1 more hour. We are 2 minutes and 30 seconds in. I like it. So yeah, this in total, I believe it's gonna take like 3 minutes and 30 seconds for everything. So yeah, we're gonna take a break and then we're gonna go over the client assessments and the quizzes. That was a lot of information. I'm not gonna lie, dude. That was a lot of freaking information. But the important thing is to apply it for the quizzes. Implement. This is what I want to see here, bro. The tibialis anterior. In the heel elevation, it's gonna be weak muscle. It's gonna be a tibialis anterior. Thigh muscle is gonna be the soleus. True. It's right here, dude. That's the thing. All right, let's do this. Let's do this. What then? Right, I'll be right back. Yeah, that's the last part, dude. The quiz. The quiz, it had like 11 models for that quiz. It was crazy. How can you have 11 models? It was a lot of information anyway. So I get it. Yeah. It's 3 p.m. That's how long it takes to study, man. It's insane. Bueno, señores, he tomado un break más largo de la cuenta. Estoy de vuelta. Eh, no quiero reiniciarlo ahorita. Ah, la que pesada estaba. Bueno, vamos a empezar con. Dude, why am I talking in Spanish? This is in English. I don't know what happened. I was talking to someone in Spanish. That's why I choose. I just got messed up. My brain is like, this is in English. God damn it. All right. So we start these client assessments. Assessments overview. Assessments used for general fitness, special populations, and athletes. Needs of the clients will determine the needs of the clients will determine which you will choose. Scoliosis cannot be treated by a trainer. It's outside your scope of practice. Don't coach them through the movements. We identify, don't coach them through the movements. We identify overactive or underactive muscles. You have to do 5 to 15 repetitions of the same movements. Anything more can cause fatigue. Write down what you observe. Movement patterns start from the ground up, from the foot and ankle to the head. I believe that is for an overhead squat assessment. Movement patterns start from the ground up. Foot and ankle. Movement patterns start from the ground up, from the foot and ankle to the head. Strength or performance assessments applicable to the client, like the bench press or the squat. The strength or the performance assessments is going to be applicable to the client, like the bench press or the squat is going to be the strength or the performance assessments. Strength or performance assessments applicable to the client, like the bench press or the squat. Strength or performance assessments applicable to the client, like the bench press or the squat. Strength or performance assessments applicable to the client, like the bench press or the squat. Strength or performance assessments applicable to the client, like the bench press or the squat. Applicable to the client, like bench press or squat. Make sure the client is cleared of for any cardiovascular assessment activities. So the strength or performance assessments applicable to the client, uh, like the bench press or the squat. Make sure the client is cleared of any cardiovascular assessment activity applicable to the client, like the bench press or the squat. Make sure the client is cleared of any cardiovascular assessment activities. Now repeat assessments periodically. Make sure the client is cleared of any cardiovascular assessment activities, and you have to repeat you have to repeat. Make sure the client is cleared. The client is cleared of any cardiovascular. Is cleared. Make sure the client has to be cleared for any cardiovascular assessment activities because sometimes they may be injured or they have low endurance capacities. So repeat assessments periodically. You have to repeat the assessments periodically, once a month or every 3 months. You have to repeat the assessments periodically, like once a month or every 3 months. Now the client forms. Now you have in here the client forms and privacy. The client forms and privacy. Once a month or every 3 months. In here you have the client forms and privacy. The client forms and privacy. The client forms and privacy. Client forms and privacy. You have the HIPAA is going to be the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Any information related to the healthcare that can be linked to an individual by a covered entity. The client forms and privacy. You have the HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. The client forms and privacy. The first one is the HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. USA, you have any information related to the healthcare that can be linked to an individual by a covered entity. Subjective versus objective assessments. HIPAA, any information held by a covered entity that includes healthcare linked to an individual. Medical history, contact info, and demographic details must protect clients' privacy and personal information. Keep all of the clients' forms in a locked cabinet. You need to keep all of the client forms in a locked cabinet. It is your responsibility as a fitness professional to research and understand the client's protection of privacy. It is your responsibility as a fitness professional to research and understand the client's protection of privacy. It is your responsibility as a fitness professional, as a fitness, it is your responsibility as a fitness professional to research and understand the client's protection of privacy. Overhead squat assessments is the body weight movement screen that provides insight into muscular deficiency. The overhead squat assessment is the body weight movement screen that provides insight to muscular deficiencies. That's overhead squat assessment, the body weight movement screen that provides insight into muscular deficiency. That when they go down and up. Overhead squat assessments, a body weight movement screen that provides insight into muscular deficiencies. Arms overhead from start to finish, encourage a slow and controlled tempo. Assessment help establish best baselines like track progress and provide insight. Overactive on same side and underactive on opposite sides. Adductors and hip flexors, so overactive on the same side and underactive on the opposite sides, like for example the adductors and the hip flexors. Overactive on opposite sides and underactive on the same sides. You have the overactive on opposite sides and underactive on the same sides. You have the calves, the piriformis, the hamstrings, and the glute medius. Observe movement patterns and major dysfunctions from 5 to 15 repetitions. Again, you need to observe the movement patterns and major dysfunctions from 5 to 16 repetitions, like you did in here. So, overactive on the same sides and underactive on the opposite sides. Adductors and hip flexors, overactive on opposite sides and underactive on the same sides. You have the calves, the piriformis, the hamstrings, and the glute medius. Observe movement patterns and major functions from 5 to 15 repetitions. So you need to observe movement patterns and major dysfunctions from 5 to 15 repetitions. Assessment tips for success. Assessment tips for success. Assessment tips for success. Client assessments help establish baseline measurements. Client assessments help establish baseline measurements. Client assessments help establish baseline measurements, track clients' progress, and provide insight into potential challenges that need to be considered when designing the client's fitness program. Assessment tips for success. You have the client assessments that help establish baseline measurements, track clients' progress, and provide insight into potential challenges that need to be considered when designing the client's fitness program. Tips for ensuring consistency and accuracy. We always take measurements at the same time of the day. So, assessment tips for success. Assessment help establish the baseline measurements, track client's progress, and provide insight into potential challenges that need to be considered when designing the client's fitness program. Tips for ensuring consistency and accuracy. Always take measurements at the same time of the day and use the same equipment to measure weight, height, etc. No two scales will read the same weight, the same, and none are perfect. Take measurements on one side of the body, right-handed measurements on the right hand of the on the right hand on the right side on the right side of the client's body, on the right side of the client's body. Of overall body weight is impacted. Overall body weight is impacted throughout the day. The overall body weight is impacted throughout the day. Calculating body fat, take measurements on one side of the body, right-handed measure on the right side of the client body. Overall body weight is impacted throughout the day. Calculating body fat, take measurements on overall body weight is impacted throughout the day. Calculating body fat, take measurements on one side of the body. Uh, Right-handed, measure on the right side, measure on the right side, on the right side of the client's body. Right-handed, measure on the right side of the client's body. Use the belly button of the body. Use the belly button as a landmark. Bicep measurement, find a midpoint. Use the belly button as a landmark. Bicep measurement, find a midpoint. Movement and posture assessment. Use belly button as a landmark. Bicep measurement, find a midpoint. Movement and posture assessment. Movement uh, movement and posture movement movement and posture assessment, movement and posture assessments, movement and posture assessments, movement and posture assessments, movement and posture assessments, movement and posture assessments. Stay consistent. Movement and posture assessments stay consistent into what you're observing. Stay consistent into what you're observing and recording. Use kinetic change head points as a guide. Movement and posture assessments. Stay consistent into what you're observing and recording. Use kinetic change head points as a guide. Movement and posture assessments. Stay consistent into what you are observing and recording. Use kinetic change head points as a guide. Movement and posture assessments. Stay consistent into what you're observing and recording. Use kinetic chain head points as a guide. Use kinetic chain head points as a guide. Take shoes off for better measurement and visibility. Take shoes off. Take shoes off for better measurement and visibility. Some clients will prefer to keep the shoes on. Always ask them about their preference. What do you always ask them about their preference? So, what do you do with the assessment results? Identify or active muscles, underactive or inhibited muscles need to be addressed. Overactive muscles or shortened need to be stretched or inhibited. Overactive muscles or shortened need to be stretched or inhibited. Underactive muscles or lengthened uh, need to be activated and strengthened. First, stretch and release. First, stretch and release their antagonists overactive muscles. First, stretch and release their antagonists. Stretch and release their antagonists overactive muscles. So identify overactive muscles. Underactive or inhibited muscles needs to be addressed. Overactive muscles or shortened need to be stretched and inhibited. Underactive muscles or lengthened need to be activated and strengthened. First, stretch and release. First, you need to stretch and release their antagonist overactive muscles. One session is not enough. Be consistent as part of warm-up to ensure you are adequately addressing the issues. Consider a certification in corrective exercise for more experience. So one session is not enough. Be consistent as part of warm-up to ensure you're adequately addressing the issues, and consider a certification in corrective exercise for more experience. Now, these are the questions for the client assessment. What type of client assessment is based on observations and opinions? Subjective assessments is based on observations and opinions. So what type of client assessments is based are what type of client assessments are based on observations and opinions? That's going to be subjective assessments. What documents should a personal trainer collect from a client to show they are ready to begin an exercise program and explain any restrictions or limitations they may have? That letter is a physician's letter of clearance. The documents that a personal trainer need to collect from a client to show they are ready to begin an exercise program and explain any restrictions or limitations that they may have is the physician's letter of clearance. And explain any restrictions or limitations that they may have is going to be the physician's the physician's letter of clearance, the physician's letter of clearance, the physician's letter of clearance, the physician's letter of clearance. What does the physician's letter of clearance? What does body composition measure? Fat mass or lean body mass? What does body composition measure? What does the body composition measure? Fat mass and lean body mass. So what does the body composition measure? The fat mass and lean body mass. That's gonna be what the body composition measures. The fat mass and lean body mass. Body composition measures fat mass and lean body mass. Remember that. Body composition measures fat mass and lean body mass. The average body fat percentage for males, 17 to 25%. The average body fat percentage for males is 17 to 25%. For females, it's 25 to 31%. Remember the body composition assessment percentage? The average body fat percentage for males is 17 to 25%. What type of muscular assessment is the push-up test? Muscular endurance assessment is going to be the push-up test. Is going to be the muscular endurance assessment. Muscular endurance assessment is going to be the push-up test. Push-up test is the muscular endurance assessment. From bottom to top, What are the six kinetic chain checkpoints? The foot and ankle, the knee, the hips, the spine, the shoulders, the neck, and the head. From bottom to top, what are the six kinetic chain checkpoints? Is going to be the the foot and ankle, the knee, the hips, the spine, the shoulders, and the neck and the head. The shoulders, the head, and the neck. Which spinal the neck and head? Which spinal and head? Which spinal deviation is addressed by an excessive curvature of the thoracic spine? The kyphosis. Excessive curvature of the thoracic spine is going to be the kyphosis. Which spinal deviation is characterized by an excessive curvature of the thoracic spine? Kyphosis is the excessive curvature of the thoracic spine. Lordosis is the excessive curvature of the lumbar spine, but the excessive curvature of the thoracic spine is going to be kyphosis. Which postural and movement deviation occurs when the knee is excessively bowed outward away from the midline? Outward away from the midline is going to be knee varus. Excessive bow outward away from the midline. In knee valgus occurs during overhead squats, the adductors muscles are largely overactive. So varus, excessive knees excessively bow outward away from the midline. It's gonna be knee varus. During the overhead squat assessment, which of the following muscle is likely underactive weak? If the heels elevate, the underactive weak muscle is gonna be the tibialis anterior. Then the overactive muscle is, or the muscle that needs to be uh, what was the name? That's gonna be the soleus, by the way. It's gonna be soleus. Uh, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Hold up. The possible tight muscles or the tight muscle, the overactive tight muscle is gonna be the soleus. Weak or underactive is gonna be the tibialis anterior. Then the overactive or tight muscle is gonna be soleus. This equals to the thoracic spine is gonna be kyphosis. Which postural movement occurs when the knee is excessively bowed outward away from the midline? Away from the midline is gonna be knee varus. During the overhead squat assessments, which of the following muscles is likely underactive, weak if the heels elevate? The underactive weak muscles if the heels elevate is going to be the tibialis anterior. It's likely underactive during the overhead squat assessment. And the overactive or tight muscles is going to be the soleus. During the overhead squat assessment, which of the following muscles are likely overactive tight if the knee valgus occurs? So which of the following are likely overactive tight if the knee valgus occurs is going to be the adductors. The adductors are going to be overactive tight if the knee valgus occurs. In here you have knee valgus, adductor, biceps femoris, TFL, and vastus lateralis is going to be the tight muscles. The weak muscles is going to be gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, and vastus medialis. So, what type of client assessment? What type of client assessments are based on observations and opinions? Is going to be subjective assessments. What document should a personal trainer collect from a client to show they are ready to begin an exercise program and explain any restrictions or limitations they have? It's going to be the physician's letter of clearance. Uh, what body composition measure? What does body composition measure? What does the body composition measure? What does the body composition measure? Is going to be the body composition measures fat mass and lean body mass. The body composition measures fat mass and lean body mass. What does the average body fat percentage? What is the average body fat percentage for males? What is the average body fat percentage for males? The average body fat percentage for males is 17 to 25%. What type of muscular assessment is the push-up test? What type of muscular assessment is the push-up test? Is going to be the muscular endurance assessment. The muscular assessment that is in the push-up test is going to be the muscular endurance assessment. From bottom to top, what are the six kinetic chain checkpoints? It's going to be the foot and ankle, the knee, the hips, the spine, the shoulders, and the neck and head. Which spinal deviation is characterized by the excessive curvature of the thoracic spine? Is going to be kyphosis. What posterior movement deviation occurs when the knee is excessively bowed outward away from the midline, knee varus? During the overhead squat assessment, which of the following muscle is likely underactive, weak? If the heels elevate, it's going to be the tibialis anterior. In the overhead squat assessment, which of the following are likely overactive tight if the knee valgus occurs? If knee valgus occurs, it's going to be the adductors. The adductors, knee valgus, adductors, going to be movement toward the midline. That's why it's adductors. The biceps femoris, the TFL and the vatus lateralis, nivalgus, adductors. Overactive diet. Quiz 7, elements of fitness. Exercise programming progression. Each workout, elements of fitness. Elements of fitness. Exercise programming progression. Quiz 7, elements of fitness. Exercise programming progression. Each workout is tailored for each elements of fitness. Exercise programming progression. Each workout is tailored for each client's individual goals. Programming progression, increase strength, improve neuromuscular equipment, challenge the body, and prevent injury. Exercise programming progression, each workout is tailored for each client's individual goals. Exercise programming progression, each workout is tailored for each client's individual goals. Now, pro program progression is going to be to increase strength, improve neuromuscular recruitment, challenge the body, and prevent injury. It's a program progression. Each workout is tailored for each client's individual goals. Each workout is tailored for each client's individual goals. Each workout is tailored for each client's individual goals. Program progression. Each workout is tailored for each workout is tailored for each client's individual goals. For each client's individual goal. Program progression, increase strength. So each program is tailored for each client's individual goals. Program progression, increase strength, improve neuromuscular recruitment, challenge the body, and prevent injury. Stable to unstable. Stable to unstable. Client needs to master a movement pattern on a stable environment to be able to do it in an unstable one. Study to dynamic and moving challenge to move it fluid dynamic way. Like the plank like plank to leg race. Like plank to leg race. Slow to fast and simple to complex movement. Uh, like plank to leg race. Slow to fast and simple to complex movement patterns. Movement patterns. Light to heavy. Light to heavy. Light to heavy to build strength and resistance to cardiovascular training. Light to heavy to build strength and resistance to cardiovascular training. Light to heavy to build strength and resistance and cardiovascular training. Light to heavy to build strength and resistance and cardiovascular training. Light to heavy to build strength. Light to heavy to build strength. Light to simple, slow to fast and simple to complex movement patterns. Now, light to heavy to build strength uh, and resistance to cardiovascular training. Light to heavy to build strength and resistance and cardiovascular training. Known to unknown, begin with moving patterns that they know before executing ones they are unfamiliar with or moving to new ones. Principles and programming design. They guide how a personal trainer creates exercise programs. Primary principles is going to be principle specificity, that's specific attention to positive math principles, set principle of variability, of individual differences, of progressive overload, of reversibility, and the GAS general adaptation syndrome principle. Principle of individual differences. No two people will have the same response to the same exercise. GAS principle help us understand how the body responds to stress. Uh, help us understand how the body responds to the stress of exercise. Principle of progressive overload. Principle of progressive overload. Stress must be greater than what is typically encountered to drive adaptation. Intensity can be increased by load, volume, time under tension, or range of motion. Principle of variability. Exercise programs must vary. Principle of variability. Exercise programs must vary intensity, duration, load, volume, and other variables, not just about weight being used. The principle of variability. Exercise programs must vary intensity, duration, load, volume, and other variables, not just about weight being used. The principle of variability means that the exercise programs must vary intensity, duration, load, volume, and other variables. The principle of variability means that the exercise programs must vary intensity, duration, load, volume, and other variables, not just about the weights being used. Principle of variability. Exercise programs must vary in intensity, duration, load, volume, and other variables, not just about the weight being used. Not just about the weight being used. Now, the principle of specificity, not just about the weight being used. City, duration, load, volume, and other variables, not just about the weight being used. Now, the principle of specificity states that the training must be specific to the desired training outcomes. The principle of specificity states that the training must be specific to the desired training outcomes. The principle of specificity means that it states that the training must be specific to the desired training adaptation. The principle of specificity states that the training must be specific to the desired training adaptation. Now, the set principle is going to be the specific physiological adaptations on the body based on the demands, based on the demands being placed on the body. If a client runs, if the client runs 30 miles 30 miles a week, the body will adapt and will get good at running longer distances. Endurance will improve. Specific adaptation to impose demands. Specific physiological adaptations on the body based on the demands being placed on the body. If the client runs 30 miles a week, the body will adapt and will get good at running longer distances. Endurance will improve. Endurance will improve. Endurance will improve. Think of the principles every time you work out. Endurance will improve. Think of the principles every time you work out. Think of the principles every time you work out. Think of the principles every time you create a workout. If the client runs 30 miles a week, their body will adapt to and will get good at running longer distances. Endurance at running longer distances. Endurance will improve. 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 Think about endurance will improve. Think of the principles every time you create a workout. Endurance will improve. Think about the principles. Endurance will improve. Endurance will improve. Think of the principles every time you create a workout. Think of the principles every time you create a workout. Which of the 5 components of fitness is required as the physical makeup of the body, considering fat mass and lean mass? Is going to be body composition. This is required as a physical makeup of the body, considering fat mass and lean mass, is going to be the body composition. Which of the following is a known benefit of improving muscular strength? Which of the following is a known benefit of improving muscular strength? A known benefit of improving muscular strength is going to increase the bone density. A known benefit of improving muscular strength is that it increases bone density. What type of warm-up is simple and aims to increase blood flow, respiration, body temperature, and neural activation of minor muscle groups? The general warm-up. The general warm-up. Which element of a fitness program trains the body to be explosive, fast, and agile and reactive training? Element of a fitness program trains the body to be explosive, fast, and agile. Is going to be the reactive training. What is the definition of agility as it relates to the elements of reactive training? The ability to accelerate, decelerate, stabilize, and change direction with proper posture. Agility is going to be ability to accelerate, decelerate, stabilize, and change direction with proper posture. What type of cardiorespiratory training is performed at a fixed level of exertion? A steady state exercise is performed at a fixed level of exertion in a cardiorespiratory training. The type of cardiorespiratory training that is performed at a fixed level of exertion is a steady state exercise. Which of the following is a known benefit of interval training? A strengthening of the left ventricle of the heart. A known benefit of the interval training is that it strengthens the left ventricle of the heart. A strengthening of the left ventricle of the heart. A strengthening of the left ventricle of the heart is going to be a known benefit of interval training. A strengthening of the left ventricle of the heart. Which of the five components of kinetic is a measure of force produced by a muscle or group of muscles, muscular strength? The measure of force produced by a muscle or group of muscles is going to be muscular strength. Now, which of the following is a measure commonly used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise? Measure commonly used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise is going to be the rate of perceived exertion. Determines the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise is going to be the rate of perceived exertion. Which of the following is an adaptation from plyometric exercise? An adaptation from a plyometric exercise is going to be increased muscle size. Increased muscle size. Increased muscle size. Increased muscle size. So which of the five components of a fitness is described as the physical makeup of the body considering fat mass and lean mass is going to be body composition. And which of the following is a known benefit of improving muscular strength? Is going to increase bone density. What type of warm-up is simple and aims what type of warm-up is simple and is to increase blood flow, respiration, body temperature, and neural activation of major muscle groups? It's going to be the general warm-up. The general warm-up. Which element of fitness program trains the body to be explosive, fast, and agile? Agility. Reactive training. Reactive training trains the body to be explosive, fast, and agile. It's going to be the reactive training. The reactive training teaches the body to be explosive, fast, and agile. The element of a fitness program that trains the body to be explosive, fast, and agile is going to be the reactive training. The reactive training is going to teach the body to be explosive, fast, and agile. Now, what is the definition of agility as it relates to the element of a reactive training? The ability to accelerate, decelerate, stabilize, and change direction with proper posture. The definition of agility as it relates to the elements of reactive training. Definition of agility as it relates to the element of reactive training. Ability to accelerate, decelerate, stabilize, and change direction with proper posture. What type of cardiorespiratory training is performed at a fixed level of exertion? A steady state exercise is performed at a fixed level of exertion, cardiorespiratory training. What type of cardiorespiratory training is performed at a fixed level of exertion is going to be steady state exercise. Which of the following is a known benefit of interval training? A strengthening of the left ventricle of the heart. A known benefit of interval training is going to be the strengthening of the left ventricle of the heart. Which of the five components of fitness is described as the measure of force produced by a muscle or group of muscles? The measure of force produced by the muscle or group of muscles is going to be muscular strength. The muscular strength is the measurement of force produced by the muscle or group of muscles. So, which of the following is a which of the following is a measure commonly used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise? So, which of the following is a measure commonly used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise? Measures the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise is going to be the rate of perceived exertion. So, which of the following is a measure commonly used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise? The rate of perceived exertion is going to be a measure that is commonly used to determine the intensity of cardiorespiratory exercise. It's going to be the rate of perceived exertion. And which of the following is an adaptation from plyometric exercise? Which of the following is an adaptation from a plyometric exercise? Is going to be increased muscle size. Adaptation from a plyometric exercise is going to be increased muscle size. Adaptation from plyometric exercise is going to be increased muscle size. Video. Now, principles of program design. Principles of program design, the last chapter. For this session, the principles of program design. Training periodization. Training periodization is a plan. Training periodization is a plan. Allows you to separate exercise programs into distinct purposeful blocks of time, smaller blocks, specific training goals, and adaptations. Progress as well is tracked. Allows for recovery, help reduce risk of injury, and prevent the risk of injury and prevent overtraining. So training periodization is a plan. Allows you to separate exercise programs into distinct purposeful blocks of time. Smaller blocks is going to be specific training goals and adaptations. Progress as well is tracked. Allow for recovery, help reduce the risk of injury, and prevent overtraining. Three divisions in the traditional training periodization is going to be the macro cycle, which is 1 year goal, mesocycles 8 to 12 weeks long, and the micro cycles is going to take 1 week or one single training session. Start with the big picture and work through the details. Begin with the macro cycle, followed by the mesocycles 4 to 5, and each microcycle where individual workouts can be planned. The general adaptation syndrome gas principle is going to be an example of science-based decisions about health and fitness programs for clients. An example of science-based decisions. An example of science-based decisions. Gas principle is an example of science-based decisions about health and fitness programming for clients. Also known as the gas principle, it describes how the human body responds to new stress or stimulus. It describes how the human body responds to new. It describes how the human body responds to a new stress, or stimulus. How the human body responds to a new stress, or stimulus. Describes how the human body responds to a new stress or stimulus. The general adaptation syndrome is a principal example of science-based decisions about health and fitness programming for clients. Also known as the gas principle, it describes how the human body responds, to a new stress, to, to a new stress or stimulus. How the human body responds to a new stress or stimulus. To a new stress or stimulus. Response to a new stress or stimulus. The gas principle is going to be the gas principle is going to be the the gas principle is going to be free-phase process. The gas principle is going to be a free-phase process. The the gas principle is going to be a free-phase process. The gas principle is going to be a free-phase process. The gas principle is going to be a free-phase process. It's going to be the alarm stage, the resistance stage, and the exhaustion phase. The alarm is going to be the body response to a new stress or stimulus. Stresses imposed to the body through exercise. Stress is imposed to the body through exercise. The resistance is going to be after a new stress is introduced, when biological changes and adaptations occur. After a new stress is introduced, when biological changes and adaptations occur. And exhaustion is going to be new stress or stimulus introduced, and the body does not adapt properly. Overtraining or under-recovering occurs. We try to avoid this phase. Overtraining or under-recovering occurs. We try to avoid this phase. When exercising more doesn't always mean better. When exercising more doesn't always mean better. When exercising more doesn't always mean better. The warm-up and cool-down are essential elements of the fitness program. Serve specific psychological purposes for preparing the body for an activity and starting the recovery process after exercise. Warm-up before activity benefits: increases heart rate and blood flow, increases oxygen delivery to muscles, increases body temperature to warm muscles and make them more pliable, and increases mobility of synovial joints, increases muscular connection, increases neuromuscular connections between the brain, the nerves, and the muscle cells, and increase the muscle contractibility, and muscle cells, and it increases the muscle contractility, ability of muscles to contract, and increase the muscle contractility, the ability of muscles, the ability of the muscles to contract, the ability of muscles to contract. Warm-ups can be general or specific. The cool down is going to be normalizes blood pressure, heart rate, breathing rate, and body temperature to gradually return back to normal. Lactic acid in the muscles is flushed out, and excess CO2 is cleared from the lungs. Relaxes the sympathetic nervous system with fight or flight. with fight or flight, activates parasympathetic nervous system, branch that controls energy conserving rest and digest functions of our body when balanced or in homeostasis. Or in homeostasis. Common cool down activities is going to be dynamic and static stretching, slow paced walking, myofascial release techniques, and deep breathing practices. Balance training modalities. Balance training modalities. Training for balance improves perception, the ability of the body to recognize where it is in space. Improves coordination, increases the ability to produce mood and control movements and reduce injury risk. Doesn't need to be time consuming. Doesn't need to be time consuming. Keep balance exercises. Keep balance exercises safe. Progression needs to be followed to make it gradually. Progression needs to be followed to make it gradually more challenging. Make it gradually more challenging. Keep balance exercises safe. Progression needs to be followed to make it gradually more challenging. Work work in all three more challenging. Work in all three planes of motion. Work in all of the three planes of motion. Work in all three planes of motion. Work in all three planes of motion. In the sagittal plane, in the frontal plane, and the transverse plane. You need to work in all three planes of motion, in the sagittal plane, in the frontal plane, and the transverse plane. You need to work in all three planes of motion, in the sagittal plane, in the frontal plane, and the transverse plane. General progression for balance training, you have from simple to complex exercises, stable to unstable surfaces, low to fast movements, bilateral to unilateral, static to dynamic, eyes open to eyes closed. Progress balance gradually. You need to progress balance gradually. You need to progress the balance gradually. You need to progress the balance gradually. Progress balance gradually. Now, in fitness, what do acute training variables determine? How an exercise or training program is performed. In fitness, what do acute training variables determine? How an exercise or training program is performed. How an exercise or training program is performed. Which acute training variable is the equipment, methods, or technique used to complete an activity? Equipment methods or techniques used to complete an activity is going to be type. Equipment methods or techniques used to complete an activity is going to be type. What the load used for a resistance training exercise is not related to which acute training variable. The load used for a resistance training exercise is most closely associated with to which acute training variable, which intensity. Load used for resistance training exercise. Training intensity of 67% or less. Training intensity of 67% or less is more closely related to which training adaptation. Muscular endurance has a training intensity of 67% or less. Muscular endurance has a training intensity of 67% or less, most closely related to which training adaptation, muscular endurance. For a training adaptation of muscle hypertrophy, what is the recommended number of repetitions per set? The recommended number of repetitions per set for muscular hypertrophy is 6 to 12 repetitions. 6 to 12 repetitions. What does the F in the FIT principle stand for? For frequency. The what principle of fitness states that the acute training variables must be changed periodically to prevent plateaus, injuries, or boredom? A principle of variability, definitely. What is the final stage of the general adaptation syndrome? Is going to be exhaustion, alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. So resistance training is included in which category of training? The resistance training is included in the strength training. Resistance training is included in which category of training? The strength training. And what condition is the result of the accumulation of stress from both training and non-training activities? The the condition that is the result of the accumulation of stress from both training and non-training activities that resulting in short-term decrease in performance, overreaching. Short-term decrease in performance is overreaching. Long-term decrease in performance is uh, overtraining. Short-term decrease in performance is overreaching. Long-term is going to be overtraining. Overtraining is going to be long-term decrease in performance. Increasing performance capacity. Condition is the result of accumulation of stress, which results in a short-term decreases in performance capacity is going to be overreaching. Acute training variables determine how exercise or training program is performed. Acute training variables determine how an exercise or training program is performed. Which acute training variables the equipment methods or techniques used to complete an activity is going to be type. type. Now, the load used for a resistance training exercise is more clearly related with which actual training variable, which intensity. Now, a training intensity of 67% or less is more clearly related to which training adaptation with muscular endurance. Training intensity of 67% or less is more clearly related to which training adaptation with muscular endurance. For a training adaptation of muscle hypertrophy, what is the recommended number of repetitions per set? 6 to 12 repetitions. The F in the fit principle stands for frequency. Then the principle of variability, which is going to be which principle of fitness says that acute variables must be changed periodically to prevent plateaus, injuries, or and boredom is going to be the principle of variability. The final stage of the general adaptation syndrome of the gas principle is going to be the exhaustion stage. The final stage of the general adaptation syndrome is going to be the exhaustion stage. In the resistance training is included in which category of training? In strength training. The resistance training is included in the strength training category. The resistance training is included in the strength training category. And finally, what condition is the result of the accumulation of stress from both training and non-training activities that resulting in short-term decreases in performance is going to be overreaching. Overreaching is the condition resulting from the accumulation of stress from both training and non-training activities, resulting in a short-term performance decreases. Dale. Pásame. So the condition that results from the accumulation of so the condition that results from the accumulation of stress from both training and non-training activities resulting in the short-term decreases in performance capacity is going to be overreaching, definitely overreaching. That was it for the chapter 9 quiz. The quiz 8, overreaching, is going to be the last one. That was it for quiz 8. Training categories, remember foundational strength, metabolic, and speed, agility, and quickness in categories. So that was it, bro. Overreaching. So it's going to be overreaching. In performance, it's going to be overreaching. Now, after this, we're gonna go over concepts of flexibility training, but we are done for today. Also, remember the positional acceleration from squat assembly, the possible weak muscles and the possible tight muscles. That was it for now, bro. We just went over all this information. It took us about 3.5 hours, and that was like really crazy. So I'm done. I'm really tired. So for now, yeah, we finished the applied science portion, anatomy, kinesiology, and physiology. We finished all of the applied science portion. We also finished like the for the program design and implementation. We finished some of the principles of program design. We finished implementation, program design activities. We still need to go over the program implementation because we haven't gone for over special populations yet. But we already went for our principle of program design. And we need to go specifically for each type of training category. We're going to go over the concepts of flexibility training, concepts of cardiovascular training, where we're going to be able to see more specifically about the rate of perceived exertion and the cardiac heart rates, the heart rate zones, the concepts of resistance training, where we see the muscular endurance, the intensity in one repetition max, the concept of resistance training for chapter 12, and finally exercise selection and technique. So we definitely have a lot of information that builds up to what we saw today, where we already went over principles of program design, the elements of fitness, and the client assessments for intent and ongoing evaluation, where we collected and reviewed all necessary documentation, the medical release, medical history, liability waiver, conduct a basic fitness assessment. We conducted a basic fitness assessment like postural, performance, movement, strength, cardiovascular flexibility, and body composition. And we interpreted the results of all assessments in relation to class goals. like the comparison to the general population, the initial assessments versus the ongoing assessments. So we definitely went over a lot of information. We finished all of the applied sciences and all of the intake and ongoing evaluation. Uh, Program design and implementation, we started it. So exercise selection, technique, and training instruction, that's going to be chapter 13. Coordinate and monitor client. So definitely we have scope of practice. Like every information for each chapter, it builds up to all of the outline for this for the NCCPT Certified Personal Trainer accredited exam. So we're almost done. Uh, I mean, we are halfway there. I believe in three more sessions we are gonna be able to finish it all. For tomorrow, we're gonna go over the concepts of flexibility training and cardiovascular exercise. And if I have time, I'm also gonna go over resistance training, but I don't promise you that because that might be the day after there's an exercise selection and technique because I think we're gonna lack some time. Tomorrow I have a lot of stuff to do. Then so that means that my goal is to finish chapters 10 and 11 for tomorrow. If we can finish more, that will be wonderful. But if not, then on Wednesday I'm gonna go over chapters 12 and 13, and maybe gonna start going over nutrition and supplementation as well for Wednesday, and hopefully be able to finish it all for Friday or Saturday. Like I want to finish it all this week because I want to take the final exam or this accredited exam. I want to take it for next week. Uh, I've been trying to take this accredited exam for a while, but you know, like life happens. So, but I've been studying for since April, so it's been a while already. But I learned a lot. I really learned a lot. So we are going to go over this and hopefully pass this final exam. Yeah, this has been the Elf Master. Thank you so much for watching. How long is this taking? This is oh my god, it's about to be 4 hours. That is crazy. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see